smothered pork chops, oxtails and onion gravy, a peach cobbler made from a can of fruit and a cup of self-rising flour. A black grandmother in 1970s, Memphis could set all three on the table by the time the family walked back from church, and she never opened a cookbook once. Some of these Sunday dinners will stop you cold. A neckbone stew around number 70 that fed a household of 8 on less than $4. A corn pudding closer to the middle of this list that disappeared when the old church kitchens closed down. And a fried catfish plate near the end that no restaurant has ever gotten right. 100 weekly rituals built on memory, not measurements, passed across kitchen counters in Detroit, Birmingham, Atlanta, and every small town in between. Hit subscribe because this list goes deep. Here are 100 Sunday dinners black grandmothers made without a recipe. Number 18, baked chicken quarters with onion gravy. Leg and thigh quarters, the cheapest chicken at the store, seasoned and laid in a baking dish with thick slices of onion underneath. A cup of broth went in, aluminum foil sealed the top, and the dish baked for 2.5 hours at low heat. The chicken steamed in its own juices until the meat fell off the bone and the onions melted into a sweet, savory gravy at the bottom of the pan. This was a Sunday dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a whole bird. 1/4 per person, gravy over rice, greens on the side. Simple enough that a teenager could handle it alone. Slow enough that nobody rushed the oven or the afternoon. Number 13, red beans and rice. In New Orleans, red beans and rice was the Monday meal, born from the tradition of washing clothes by hand all day while a pot simmered on the back burner. But in black households across the South, it moved to Sunday because that was when the leftover ham bone became the foundation for the next meal. A woman in Lake Charles, Louisiana, soaked dried kidney beans overnight, then cooked them with that ham bone, an onion, a bell pepper, celery, and garlic until the beans turned creamy and the broth turned thick and smoky. She served it over white rice, and the whole plate cost less than $1. Louis Armstrong loved this dish so much, he signed his personal letters with the phrase, "That was not a joke. That was a man who never forgot where his mama's food came from." The dish required no recipe because the recipe was always the same: beans, pork, Trinity, rice, thyme. Number 14, dirty rice. The name came from the way chopped chicken livers and gizzards speckled the white grains until the whole pot looked dirty. This was thrift cooking at its cleverest. The giblets that came tucked inside every chicken, the parts most kitchens discarded, were finely chopped and browned in a skillet with onion, celery, and bell pepper. That savory mixture got folded into cooked rice along with the pan drippings, staining the grains brown and loading them with deep, meaty flavor. A whole skillet of it cost almost nothing because the most expensive thing in it was the rice. It stretched a few cents of organ meat across a dish big enough to feed everyone, and it tasted far richer than its price. Working families across the South kept it in heavy rotation precisely because it turned scraps into something that ate like real meat, bold, savory, and proof that flavor never needed money. A full pot born from the parts other folks threw away. Number 22, neck bones and green beans. Fresh green beans snapped between the fingers came out of the garden all summer long, and when there were too many to eat raw or fry up quick, they went into the neck bone pot. The beans cooked until they lost every trace of crunch and turned soft and gray-green, saturated with pork fat. Nobody in those kitchens wanted a crisp green bean. Crisp meant undercooked. Done meant the bean had given up its resistance and taken on the flavor of everything around it. A plate of neck bones and green beans with a cold glass of buttermilk beside it was a July supper that did not try to impress anyone. It just filled the house with the smell of slow pork and kept the family quiet until the sun went down. In parts of rural Arkansas and East Texas, families strung green beans on thread and hung them to dry for winter, then rehydrated them in a neck bone pot months later. Those dried beans, called leather britches, came back tougher and chewier with a concentrated flavor the fresh ones never had. Number 16, stewed pig feet. Pig feet was split by the butcher, scrubbed clean, and dropped into a pot of salted water with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar. The vinegar cut through the richness and kept the broth from turning heavy. 4 hours of simmering broke down the skin, fat, and cartilage until the feet collapsed into a soft mass of gelatin and small bones held together by nothing but habit. The meat was scarce but intensely flavored, tucked into crevices between joints. Eating pig feet was slow, deliberate work done with both hands and no pretense about table manners. In black kitchens throughout the Deep South, pig feet was Saturday night food that carried over to Sunday lunch, the leftover broth spooned over rice or cornbread. The dish required no expensive ingredients, just the parts of the hog that nobody with choices would claim. When packaged meat replaced whole animal butchering and younger cooks turned away from anything that looked like what it was, the stewed pig foot lost its place at the table. Every dish so far shares the same quiet arithmetic: a cheap cut, a heavy pot, a low flame, and half a day. These were not elaborate meals. They were exercises in transformation. The women who ran those kitchens understood something the modern food industry has spent decades trying to make people forget. The cheapest ingredients become the richest food if you leave them alone long enough. That knowledge was not taught in schools or printed in cookbooks. It moved from stove to stove, hand to hand, corrected in real time by women who measured nothing and wasted less. The Sunday kitchen was not just where the food was made, it was where the knowledge lived. And when that kitchen emptied out, the knowledge left with it. Number 19, sweet potato pie. In the Black community, sweet potato pie was not just a dessert, it was almost sacred. A woman in Charleston, South Carolina, roasted her sweet potatoes until the skin split and the sugars caramelized inside. She scooped the flesh into a bowl, added butter, sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a pour of evaporated milk that she measured by counting to 3 while tilting the can. That was her measuring system, a 3-count pour. She mixed everything by hand, poured it into a pie crust she had rolled on a flour-dusted counter, and baked it until the filling set. Sweet potatoes came to American kitchens through West Africa, where yams had been a staple for generations. Enslaved cooks adapted what they knew to what was available, and sweet potato pie became a cornerstone of Black celebration. Church dinners, funerals, baptisms, family reunions. It appeared at every gathering because it carried the taste of home with it. Number 20, smoked ham, hock, and beans. This was the dish that could stretch one smoked hock across a whole week of dinners. The ham hock was the joint above the pig's foot, a knuckle of skin, fat, and a little dark meat clinging to the bone, and it was sold for next to nothing. But country cooks knew how to make a little meat go a long way. A single smoked hock dropped into a pot of dry butter beans or pinto beans would flavor the entire pot, its smoke and salt seeping into every bean over hours of low simmering. Monday, it was beans and rice. Tuesday, the same pot, reheated and thicker. By midweek, the cook would pull the meat off the bone and shred it back in, and the bone itself kept giving flavor until it was bare. One cheap joint, a bag of dried beans, and a heavy pot turned into supper night after night, a whole week of dinners from a single bone.
Cabbage rolls with ground beef and rice were a triumph of patience, skill, and unshakable hope. One head of cabbage, softened in boiling water, became the vessel for a hearty mix of rice, meat, onions, and spice. Each leaf was filled carefully, folded tight like a promise, and laid in neat rows inside a pot. Tomato sauce was poured over the top, bubbling slowly until everything came together in harmony. The scent alone could feed a soul before the first bite even touched a plate. Every roll told a story of care. A mother's hands working late into the evening, her eyes soft with purpose. The rolls were tender, flavorful, and filling, feeding large families on little more than a pound of meat. Eaten with bread to soak up the sauce, it was a dinner that made the ordinary feel special. Cabbage rolls were patience served hot, a lesson that time and love could make even the simplest food unforgettable.
Number 19, tea cakes. Before there were Cadbury, eggs, and Peeps, Black children on Easter morning found baskets filled with their grandmother's tea cakes, lightly sweet cookies made from butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and vanilla. A single batch yielded 3 to 4 dozen. The total ingredient cost during the Depression was under $1. Tea cakes were created by enslaved cooks trying to replicate the English tea cakes they baked for plantation owners. After emancipation, the recipe became a staple in your family's kitchen. For Easter, grandmothers made large batches and filled children's baskets with them instead of store-bought candy. The cookies had a character you could not find in any store. Lightly crisp on the outside, cake-like crumb inside, sweetness so subtle it whispered instead of shouted. During the Great Migration, families carried the recipe north, but in the cities, tea cakes had to compete with commercially available Easter candy. By the 1980s and 1990s, most families had stopped making them. Author Elbert Mackey wrote an entire book dedicated to preserving tea cake stories, recognizing the tradition was disappearing. When the grandmothers died, the baskets went empty.
Fried mackerel fillets brought the sea to the table without breaking the bank. Grandparents bought them salted, sometimes canned, sometimes fresh if the market was kind. Each fillet was rinsed, dried, then dredged in cornmeal seasoned with pepper and a touch of cayenne. When they hit the hot grease, the kitchen came alive with crackles and curls of steam. The fish fried golden brown, the smell sharp and inviting. Served with grits, collard greens, or a slice of cornbread, it was a full meal made from little. The first bite carried crunch, then warmth, then salt that lingered like the memory of the coast. Children learned to eat carefully, picking around the small bones with patience. For many, fried mackerel was the taste of survival and skill, of knowing how to turn thrift into comfort. It was eaten with laughter, with stories of better days and pride in how far they had come. Every piece told the truth that even a poor man's fish could taste like celebration when cooked with love. Boiled cabbage and salted fish was a meal that spoke of coastlines and hard work. Salted fish, preserved to last through rationing, was soaked and boiled until tender, its salt mellowed, but its flavor strong. The cabbage cooked alongside, soaking up the richness of the fish while releasing its own sweetness. The smell was unmistakable, the kind that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Some served it with rice or cornbread to stretch it further. It was humble, yes, but satisfying. A reminder of how deeply the sea and land fed one another. Even far from the coast, families held on to this dish, a piece of history served steaming in a single pot. It carried the spirit of fishermen, mothers, and laborers who worked with what the earth and ocean allowed. The salt clung to the air like a memory of the sea, even for those who had never seen it. This was food that told stories of storms survived, of nets mended, of tables where gratitude was the main course. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, a flavor that outlasted hardship and traveled through generations untouched.
Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. a pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour, she sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long, grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 5, fried corn in a skillet, started in the garden and ended on a plate still steaming. Fresh corn was cut from the cob with a sharp knife, the blade scraping afterward to release the milky starch that made it creamy without cream. In winter, canned corn worked, drained and dried so it wouldn't spatter. Into the skillet with butter or bacon grease, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to pull the sweetness forward. 3 or 4 minutes until the edges brown and caramelized, sugars turning golden, butter going nutty, the kitchen filling with a smell sweet enough to make you forget you were eating alone. For Black seniors in the rural South, fried corn was often the entire meal, a skillet's worth, maybe with bread, eaten at a table set for one.
Fried trout with cornmeal crust was the flavor of rivers, of long afternoons spent with fishing lines and laughter. The trout, caught fresh, was rolled in seasoned cornmeal until coated in gold. Dropped into a skillet of hot lard, it hissed and crackled like applause. When pulled out, it gleamed, crisp outside, tender within. The first bite was pure joy, salty, crunchy, and clean, like sunlight and water turned edible. Families gathered outside, eating straight from paper plates, fingers greasy, hearts light. The fish needed no sauce, no garnish, only lemon and a memory of patience. Fried trout was more than food. It was a reward for stillness, for skill, for faith that work would be met with grace. It was river and home combined, a southern hymn sung through every crisp bite. The breeze carried laughter, the oil popped in rhythm, and the air smelled of summer's reward. Every meal was a memory written in golden crust and gentle pride. Potato and onion gravy over biscuits was survival turned comfort. When meat was scarce, Grandma fried onions in butter until golden, whisking in flour and water to make a thick, creamy sauce. Potatoes followed, diced small, cooked until soft, absorbing every ounce of flavor. The gravy poured rich and heavy over biscuits, steaming and soft. It was simple, hearty, and full of the kind of satisfaction money could not buy. The onions caramelized to sweetness, the potatoes gave body, and the biscuits caught every drop. For many families, this was dinner, the kind that filled bellies and lifted spirits without apology. No one complained about what was missing. They celebrated what was there. The meal carried humility, but it also carried hope, proof that comfort could come from the humblest of hands. The kitchen smelled of toasted flour and warmth, and the first bite silenced every worry in the room. It was food that restored, reminding everyone that enough was sometimes more than plenty. Giblet gravy made from turkey or chicken organ meats transformed parts that many discarded into rich, flavorful sauce that elevated every dish it touched. When families could afford even a small bird, Black mothers saved the neck, liver, heart, and gizzard, chopping them fine and simmering them with onions and celery until tender. The organs added depth and richness that plain flour gravy could never match, creating sauce with body and complexity that tasted like hours of work. Some women strained out the meat pieces for texture-sensitive children, while others left everything in for those who appreciated authentic preparations. The gravy was thickened with flour mixed into the drippings, creating perfect consistency that coated everything without being gluey. Poured over dressing, mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, giblet gravy made every component taste richer. This was resourceful cooking at its finest, using parts that cost nothing extra.
They didn't need sides. Just a sandwich, a glass of sweet tea, and the television on low. Tomato sandwiches with mayonnaise only appeared when the garden came in. That short window in July and August when the tomatoes were heavy, warm from the vine, and red all the way through. This was never a winter meal. The tomato had to be sliced thick, almost a quarter inch, laid on soft white bread, spread with Duke's mayonnaise. Always Duke's in the South, where brand loyalty ran deeper than politics. Salt and black pepper on top, nothing else. The bread soaked through from the juice within seconds, and you ate it fast, leaning over the plate so it didn't drip down your wrist. For seniors who still kept a small garden or had a neighbor who brought tomatoes by, this sandwich was the taste of summer itself. No cooking, no heat from the stove, and a sweetness from the fruit that made the meal feel like a gift. Once the season passed, it was gone, and waiting for it to come back was part of what made it matter. Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week.
Fried cornbread, sometimes called hot water bread, was the quick fix when flour ran low and hunger ran high. A handful of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and a splash of boiling water. That was all it took. The batter hit the skillet with a hiss, puffing up into golden patties that crackled at the edges. Crisp outside and tender inside, they were eaten with greens, beans, or just on their own. It was the kind of bread that came together fast and filled every stomach around the table. Folks joked that hot water bread was born out of stubbornness because no shortage could stop people from making something warm to eat. It was humble, yes, but it held pride, flavor, and the kind of history that keeps families strong even when times are lean. The sound of it frying filled the room with life, and the smell carried straight to the porch. Children would watch, waiting for the first piece to cool, their mouths watering. Some cooks added a touch of bacon grease for richness, others fried them plain, relying on the corn's sweetness alone. Each patty was a small victory, a promise that even the simplest meal could feel whole when shared with love. Fried bologna sandwiches were the weeknight heroes of the kitchen. Bologna hit the hot skillet with a sizzle, the edges curling like petals as it browned. Grandparents flipped each slice just once, careful not to burn the good parts. The smell was sharp, salty, and rich, filling the house faster than the hunger could. White bread waited on the counter, sometimes toasted, sometimes soft, and mustard or hot sauce turned it into magic. When money ran short, this sandwich saved the day. It was fast, filling, and full of character. Kids loved the crunch at the edge, the way the heat softened the bread just enough to make it melt in your hands. Grown folks knew it for what it was, a humble blessing. Fried bologna sandwiches tasted like memory and invention, like comfort built on what little was left.
Number 21, pineapple upside-down cake. The moment your grandmother flipped that cast iron skillet and the cake came out perfect, golden and glistening, the whole kitchen held its breath. Not a single pineapple ring out of place. That flip was the most dramatic moment of Easter dinner. Canned pineapple became widely available after the First World War when the Hawaiian Pineapple Company began marketing it aggressively. In 1925, they held a recipe contest that received 60,000 entries. 2,500 of them were for pineapple upside-down cake. A can of pineapple rings cost about 25 cents in the 1940s. The cake required just one 10-inch cast iron skillet, which most black households already owned. Betty Cook, food columnist for the Afro-American newspaper, celebrated this cake in a 1955 column read by millions of black Americans. She called it gorgeous with its glistening top. As cast iron cooking declined and box mixes took over, the from scratch skillet version became rare. But if you grew up watching your grandmother hold her breath during that flip, you never forgot. You carry that moment with you.
Cornbread and beans was the supper of survivors, the backbone of countless working families who knew how to turn little into plenty. The beans simmered low and slow, soaking up every bit of flavor from scraps of onion, bacon, or a precious ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. The longer they cooked, the richer they became, filling the home with a deep, savory scent that promised satisfaction. Cornbread baked nearby, its golden crust rising in the oven, the smell of butter and cornmeal mixing perfectly with the aroma of beans on the stove. When dinner was ready, families gathered close, crumbling the cornbread right into their bowls to soak up the thick broth. It wasn't just filling, it was fulfilling, warming both the body and the spirit. Some families added vinegar, others sprinkled sugar, but every household had its way of making it just right. Cornbread and beans told a story of endurance and community, of hard hands and full hearts. It wasn't luxury, it was life, steady and sustaining, passed from one generation to the next as a lesson in gratitude and grace. It reminded everyone that love, like good beans, only grows stronger the longer it's tended.
Number 17, neck bones and egg noodles. Egg noodles were not something every family kept, but the ones who did swore by them. The noodles were wider and denser than spaghetti, and they held up better in a heavy pork broth without turning to mush. Families dropped them into the pot after the neck bones had simmered for 2 hours, and in 15 minutes, the noodles went soft and slippery, coated in rendered fat. The broth thickened from the starch and turned silky in a way that plain water and bones alone never could. In parts of Tennessee and Virginia, this was a cold weather meal that came out when the temperature dropped below freezing and the kitchen windows fogged up from the steam. Children ate the noodles first and went back for the bones, sucking the marrow out and stacking the clean bones on the edge of the plate like a small monument to what had been supper. Number 21, liver and onions. Organ meat was given away nearly free, and black cooks turned it into a supper rich enough to feed a working man. When hogs were butchered, the liver was among the parts handed off rather than kept, which made it one of the cheapest sources of protein in the store. Cooks dredged the slices in seasoned flour, then laid them in a hot skillet just long enough to brown, because liver turns tough the moment it overcooks. The real magic was the onions. A great pile of them went soft and sweet in the same pan, soaking up the drippings, then got spooned over the top with a thin gravy made from the browned bits. The sweetness of the onion balanced the deep iron flavor of the meat. Served over rice or with a slab of cornbread, it stretched a few pennies of organ meat into a hearty plate, cheap, nourishing, and gone too soon from most kitchens. Number 22, baked macaroni and cheese. This wasn't the kind from a blue box. This was a Sunday production. A woman in Atlanta mixed elbow macaroni with 3 or 4 kinds of cheese, eggs, evaporated milk, butter, and a seasoning blend she kept in an unmarked jar. She poured it into a casserole dish and baked it until the top turned golden and the edges got crispy enough to snap. The middle stayed creamy and soft. The secret, she said, was in knowing when to pull it from the oven, not by a timer, but by the color of the crust. According to food historians, James Hemings, an enslaved chef who trained in France, brought macaroni and cheese to American tables in the 1700s, and 200 years later, Black women had perfected it into something that had everything to do with a kitchen full of family waiting for Sunday dinner. The recipe was never written down because it changed every time. A little more cheese one week, a little less milk the next. If you asked her how much of each, she couldn't tell you. She adjusted by feel, and it was never wrong. Number 22, neck bones and rice. Pork neck bones were cheap, bony, and full of marrow. Browned in a skillet with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, they went into a heavy pot with sliced onions and enough water to cover. 3 hours of simmering extracted every ounce of flavor from the bones and turned the surrounding meat fork tender. The broth that formed was ladled over a mound of white rice, so the grains swelled and softened into a thick, savory porridge. Every plate required a pile of napkins and the patience to pick around small bones. Neck bones were the kind of cut that a Black grandmother could buy with pocket change and turn into a meal that fed everyone at the table twice. When pre-cut boneless pork took over the meat counter and a new generation stopped wanting to eat around cartilage, the dish quietly left the Sunday rotation. Pigtails and brown gravy. Pigtails were the cheapest pork cut the butcher had, often given away or sold by the pound for almost nothing. Chopped into short sections and browned hard in a skillet, they went into a pot with onions, garlic, soy sauce, and brown sugar. 3 hours of slow simmering turned the cartilage gelatinous and the meat tender, swimming in a thick, dark, slightly sweet gravy. The texture was unlike any other pork dish on the table, sticky, rich, and deeply savory. Pigtails were common in Black kitchens from Louisiana through the Carolinas, especially in families with Caribbean roots who brought the technique from the islands. The dish crossed borders the same way the families did. By the 1990s, the cut had vanished from most meat counters, and a generation grew up never knowing it existed. Number 19, number 15, neck bones and gravy. During slavery, enslaved people were given the cuts of meat that slaveholders did not want. Neck bones were among them. Black cooks transformed these bony, tough pieces into a meal by simmering them for hours with onions, garlic, and water until the meat turned tender and the broth thickened into a dark, velvety gravy. A woman in Montgomery, Alabama, served neck bones over white rice every other Sunday for 30 years. She seasoned them with salt, pepper, onion powder, and a bay leaf, and she let them cook so long the bones practically dissolved. The gravy was the prize. She poured it over everything on the plate. If you were in that kitchen, you remember the windows. Stayed fogged for hours from the steam. Neck bones were survival food that became tradition food that became memory food. Most butcher shops do not even carry them anymore. Here is what that loss means. An entire category of affordable, deeply flavorful cooking has gone quiet, not because it stopped tasting good. Number 16, cornmeal mush. This was breakfast, supper, and tomorrow's lunch, all from the same humble bag of meal. The cook stirred cornmeal slowly into a pot of boiling salted water, whisking hard so it would not clump, then let it bubble and thicken into a soft porridge. Eaten hot that night with a little molasses or a pat of fat, it warmed the body straight through. But the real economy showed up the next day. Whatever mush was left got poured into a loaf pan and set aside to firm up overnight as it cooled. By morning, it had set solid enough to slice. Those slices went into a greased skillet and fried until both sides turned crisp and golden, eaten with syrup or alongside whatever meat there was. One pot eaten two ways with nothing wasted between. Corn and water turned into two meals by simple patience. A poor man's dish that asked for almost nothing and gave back warmth. Number 16, neck bones and black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas carry more superstition than any other bean in the southern pantry. Eating them on New Year's Day was supposed to bring luck for the rest of the year, and most families took that seriously enough to make sure the pot was full by noon on January 1st. But black-eyed peas with neck bones was not a once-a-year occasion. It showed up whenever the dried peas were on hand and the budget was thin, which was most weeks. The peas cooked faster than pintos or limas, breaking down in about an hour into a thick, starchy pot that clung to the rice underneath. The neck bones gave them a depth that salt alone could never reach. Families in Georgia and the Carolinas grew black-eyed peas in the garden between the corn rows because the plants fixed nitrogen in the soil and helped the corn grow taller. The food fed the family and the garden fed itself. That was the kind of efficiency that did not come from a textbook. It came from people who had been watching dirt and weather for generations.
Navy bean and ham bone soup was the meal that turned leftovers into legend, a dish that spoke of slow hours and full hearts. The leftover ham bone from Sunday's meal went into a big pot with dry beans, onions, and water, and from that, magic was born. It simmered for hours until the beans softened and the meat slipped from the bone. The broth turned smoky, thick, and fragrant, filling the air with a scent that could stop conversation mid-sentence. Each spoonful carried history of thrift, care, and kitchens that knew patience by name. Sometimes carrots or celery were added if the garden gave enough. Other times, it was just beans and hope. The soup was ladled into mismatched bowls, steaming and hearty, the kind of meal that made even a cold house feel warm. Every bite tasted like effort made worthwhile, like gratitude turned into nourishment. It was proof that love, when simmered slowly, could feed a family for days.
Number 7, red drink. Shut out of the White House Easter egg roll. By segregation, black families in Washington built their own celebration. By 1919, 55,000 people showed up at the National Zoo on Easter Monday, and the red punch they served traced the line back 400 years to West Africa. The original red drink was hibiscus-based. Enslaved people in the American colonies adapted the West African hibiscus tea tradition using local berries when the flowers were unavailable. The red color carried spiritual significance in West African cultures that survived the Middle Passage. Adrian Miller, the soul food historian, documented this journey in detail. By the 1920s and 1930s, commercial products like Kool-Aid and Big Red soda began replacing the homemade version. The hibiscus punch vanished. But here is what stayed in your culture: the insistence on red. Not any color, red. At black gatherings across America, the red drink endured even after nobody remembered why it had to be red. 4 centuries of cultural memory compressed into a color. The recipe is gone, but your instinct remains.
Fried catfish. Fridays were the highlight of the week, a reward after days of work. The fish was cleaned, seasoned, and dredged in cornmeal before meeting the hot grease. The crackle of the oil was music in the kitchen, a sound everyone knew meant dinner was near. The smell drifted outside, pulling in neighbors and cousins alike. Plates were filled with fried catfish, hush puppies, and maybe some coleslaw if there was time. Grandparents said grace, then everyone dug in, hands and laughter flying. It was food for the spirit, food for community, food for faith. Fried catfish Fridays were not about wealth. They were about togetherness, joy, and pride in what could be made from so little. The meal was a celebration of ending the week strong. a tradition that turned simple fish into a feast. The crispy edges crunched, the inside melted soft, and the taste carried generations of memory. For many, this dinner meant the start of the weekend, a time to gather, to rest, and to give thanks for making it through another week. It was Southern joy served hot from the skillet. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house, and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon.
21, cornmeal mush with skim milk gravy, a cast iron skillet on a coal stove in 1943 Detroit, a cup of yellow cornmeal whisked into 3 cups of boiling salted water. The cook stirred it for 20 minutes. It pulled away from the sides of the pan in one piece, glossy and yellow as a winter sun. She poured it into a loaf tin, let it set firm overnight on the cold side of the porch. Morning came. She sliced it 1/2 inch thick, fried each piece in a teaspoon of bacon grease, topped it with skim milk gravy. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 3. The mill on Hastings Street ground the meal. The milkman delivered the skim free because nobody wanted it. Every black household in your block kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove, the kitchen heart of your neighborhood. By 1972, both were gone. Freed okra transformed a vegetable that some found challenging into crispy, addictive bites that disappeared quickly from any plate. Fresh or frozen okra was sliced into rounds, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in hot oil until golden and crunchy. The cornmeal coating sealed in the okra's natural moisture while eliminating the sliminess that turned some people away. For seniors, frozen okra made this dish accessible year-round and eliminated the prep work of washing and cutting fresh pods. A bag cost little and provided several servings of vegetables disguised as something almost indulgent. Fried okra could be a side dish, a snack, or even a light meal when paired with sliced tomatoes and cornbread. The crunch satisfied cravings for something fried while still delivering the fiber and vitamins that aging bodies needed.
Pork neck stew with mustard greens was a masterpiece of thrift, a dish that turned tough cuts into tender comfort. The neck bones simmered for hours, releasing a deep flavor that clung to every leaf of mustard green. Vinegar gave it a bright kick, pepper added fire, and the greens softened into something silky and strong. It was food for those who knew patience, who understood that good things come slow. The scent filled the whole house, rich and smoky, curling through hallways and calling everyone to the table. Served with rice or cornbread, it was as satisfying as any feast. This was the kind of dinner that told the truth about survival, making something beautiful from what others overlooked. Every spoonful carried pride, memory, and grace. Pork neck stew with mustard greens was more than a meal. It was a reminder that nothing is wasted in a kitchen built on love. The broth shimmered with richness, and the greens, once bitter, turned mellow under time and care. It was a meal that tasted like endurance itself, proof that struggle could still bring sweetness, one slow, simmering pot at a time. Pot roast with carrots and onions was the Sunday ritual that made the whole house smell like home before you even opened your eyes. The roast went into a heavy pot early in the day, searing first before settling into a long simmer with onions, carrots, and maybe a potato or two. Hours passed. The aroma grew richer, and by evening the meat was tender enough to fall apart under the slightest pressure. This was not just a meal, it was a gathering point, a reason for everyone to show up at the table. The vegetables soaked up the broth, turning sweet and soft, and the whole pot felt like comfort poured into a single dish. People still crave it because it tasted like stability, like being cared for, like the end of a long week wrapped neatly in gravy.
Number 17, short ribs in brown gravy. The short rib was a working class cut, bone-in, fatty, and tough until you gave it time. Short ribs were dredged in seasoned flour, browned in a hot skillet, then transferred to a deep pot with onions, garlic, and just enough water to make a gravy. The lid went on and the heat stayed low for 3 hours. By the time they came off the stove, the meat had pulled away from the bone and the gravy had turned thick and dark. This was not barbecue. This was stovetop braising with no recipe and no timer. The cook checked by feel, and when the bone wiggled loose, dinner was ready. Served over white rice or egg noodles with the gravy poured heavy. This meal survived on its simplicity. That same simplicity is what made it easy to forget once the faster options arrived. Number 20, cornbread dressing. This was the dish that caused family arguments at Thanksgiving, but it appeared on Sunday tables all through the fall and winter. A woman in Macon, Georgia, made cornbread a day ahead, crumbled it by hand, and mixed it with celery, onion, sage, boiled eggs, and chicken broth from scratch. The proportion of bread to broth was the whole secret, and she knew it by the feel of the mixture in her hands. Too dry and it crumbled on your plate, too wet and it turned to mush. She squeezed a handful, and if it held together but still felt light, the ratio was right. No recipe could teach you that. It was knowledge that lived in a woman's fingers, passed from mother to daughter by standing side by side in the kitchen. The sage was the signature. Too much, and it tasted like medicine. Too little, and it tasted like wet bread. Her amount was perfect, and she could not have told you what it was. Number 17, fried chicken livers. When a chicken was dressed for Sunday, the livers were never thrown out because they made a supper all their own. These little dark morsels came nearly free, the part most folks today never think to cook. The cook would rinse them, roll them in seasoned flour, and slide them into hot grease where they spit and crackled and crisped up fast. The outside turned crunchy and brown, while the inside stayed soft and rich. A few minutes was all they needed, and a small bowl of them went a long way. Some families served them over rice with a spoon of pan gravy. Others piled them onto a plate with hot sauce and ate them with their fingers straight from the skillet. Cheap, quick, and deeply savory, fried chicken livers turned a handful of giblets into a real meal, a reminder that nothing on the bird ever went to waste. Number 13, neck bone and sweet potato pot. Sweet potatoes grow easily in southern soil, and many families kept a patch of them in the yard well into the 1970s. Cut into thick rounds and added to a pot of simmering neck bones, they softened and absorbed the savory broth while holding on to their own sweetness. The combination sounds strange if you have not tasted it, but the salt and smoke from the bones against the sweetness of the potato created something the tongue recognized as complete. You did not need dessert after this meal. The sweetness was already there, built into the dinner itself. Families served this in deep bowls in the fall and winter, when the sweet potatoes came out of the ground and the cold made the body ask for something heavy. A single pot produced enough for 2 suppers, and the sweet potatoes held up better as leftovers than rice or bread did.
Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph.
Number 15, candied yams without marshmallows. The original candied yams had no marshmallows anywhere near them. They were cooked on the stove top in a cast iron skillet. Sweet potatoes, sliced thick, slow cooked in butter, brown sugar, nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla until they caramelized into a glossy, sticky glaze. The marshmallows came from a corporation. In 1917, Janet Mackenzie Hill, founder of the Boston Cooking School magazine, created the marshmallow-topped sweet potato casserole for the Angelus Marshmallow Company. A marketing campaign permanently altered a Black culinary tradition. By the 1950s, 75% of sweet potato casserole recipes in mainstream cookbooks included marshmallows. The stovetop skillet version, the original, has largely disappeared from your table. But here is what the marshmallows buried. Enslaved people recognized the sweet potato as a cousin of the yam from home. 3,000 miles from West Africa, this one vegetable carried memory. After emancipation, sweet potatoes were one of the few crops formerly enslaved people could grow on small plots of land. The yam was independence. The marshmallow was a corporate intrusion nobody asked for.
Pig feet with hot sauce turned thrift into celebration. The feet simmered for hours in a big pot with onions, vinegar, and pepper, until the meat turned tender enough to slip from the bone. The air grew thick with spice and memory, the kind of smell that called everyone to the kitchen. Grandparents served them steaming, with hot sauce on the side and cornbread ready to catch the juices. The flavor was bold, rich, and full of soul, a taste that made you pause and savor. It was food for gatherings, for laughter, for long nights spent together. Every bite was messy, sticky, and worth the wait. Pig feet taught patience and appreciation, reminding everyone that nothing in the kitchen should ever be wasted. In every pot boiled the lesson that hard work and good seasoning could turn even the humblest cut into something to be proud of. It was a dish that didn't hide its roots. It celebrated them. Families would sit shoulder to shoulder, wiping their hands between bites, laughing at stories told for the 100th time. The sound of bones clinking against plates was its own kind of music. The hot sauce gave each bite a spark, a fire that matched the spirit of the people who made it. Churned milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churned milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before.
Number 17, fried bologna and biscuit sandwich. A round of red rind bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh, 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the bologna lost its red rind. Grits with butter was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what you served alongside. Proof that the simplest dishes often provided the deepest comfort. Stone ground or regular grits were cooked slowly with water or milk, stirred frequently to prevent lumps, until they reached a creamy consistency that held its shape on a spoon. A generous pat of butter stirred in at the end added richness that transformed humble corn into something almost luxurious. For seniors on fixed incomes, grits cost pennies per serving and satisfied hunger for hours. They could be dressed up with cheese, topped with eggs, or served alongside fish, sausage, or vegetables. The dish required patience but little active work, and the reward was a bowl full of warmth that connected you to generations of Southern tables where grits was simply a part of life. The butter hit the hot iron first, then the corn, and the sizzle told you everything about how the next 5 minutes would go.
Pinto beans, slow-cooked with ham bone scraps, provided protein-rich side dishes that cost almost nothing, yet fed crowds with stick-to-your-rib satisfaction. Black mothers would soak dried beans overnight, then simmer them all day with ham bones scavenged from previous meals, creating broth that was rich with smoky, meaty flavor. The beans themselves cost less than 50 cents for a 2-pound bag that swelled to feed 20 people when cooked with onions, garlic, and bay leaves. This wasn't quick cooking, but all-day simmering that transformed hard-dried beans into creamy, tender morsels swimming in thick, flavorful liquid. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others let the ham bone provide all seasoning needed. Children might have initially resisted beans, but when served alongside cornbread for sopping up pot liquor, even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Pinto beans represented economic wisdom passed down through generations. Cabbage and corned beef hash was the pantry's promise kept. Canned corned beef sizzled in cast iron, melting into onions and potatoes until crispy at the edges. Shredded cabbage followed, softening in the fat and salt until every bite turned rich and smoky. It was a one-pan wonder, hearty enough to stand alone, humble enough to belong anywhere. For families on tight budgets, it was comfort that did not ask for apology. The kitchen filled with a scent that felt both savory and safe. Served with biscuits or rice, it fed many and left none hungry. It was proof that flavor could bloom even from a can, that dignity lived in every meal made with heart. The potatoes browned just enough to crunch, while the cabbage melted into sweetness. It was food that reminded people that love does not always wear a feast. It sometimes comes in the quiet sound of a skillet and a full belly. Cubed steak with brown gravy was one of those dinners that looked humble on the plate but tasted like it came straight from a diner counter. Families bought cubed steak because it was cheap and already tenderized, those little grid marks pressed into the meat like a promise that it would cook up soft if you treated it right. Into the skillet it went, browning just enough to build flavor before gravy was poured over the top and allowed to simmer until everything thickened and softened together. The smell alone could pull kids away from their cartoons. The meat soaked up the gravy soaked up the flavor from the meat, and together they made a dish that begged to be served over mashed potatoes, letting every drop settle into the grooves. It was the kind of meal that made you sit down, slow down, and let the warmth spread through you. Parents liked it. because it fed everyone without costing much, and kids liked it because it was soft, savory, and easy to love. Even today, people crave that plate because it tasted like steadiness, like being cared for, like a time when dinner felt like an anchor at the end of the day.
Number 21, Crowder peas with smoked meat. Crowder peas were the field pea that stained the pot liquor brown, darker and earthier than black-eyed peas with a dense, starchy bite that held up to hours of cooking. They went into a pot with a smoked ham bone or a chunk of smoked sausage, a whole onion, and enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot sat on the back of the stove all morning, the peas swelling and softening while the smoke from the meat worked its way into every bean. By the time the family sat down, the liquor at the bottom of the pot was thick enough to be a meal on its own, poured over cornbread in a glass. Crowder peas were a backyard crop, dried on the vine and shelled on the porch in late summer. The seeds passed between families like currency. When the last generation of home gardeners thinned out, the peas became hard to find, and the Sunday pot went with them. Number 20, neck bones and cabbage. A whole head of cabbage cost almost nothing, and when you cut it into wedges and dropped it into a pot of neck bones that had been simmering all day, it turned into something entirely different from raw cabbage. The leaves went soft and silky and took on all that pork and pepper flavor. The cabbage wedges held their shape just enough to lift them out with a slotted spoon and set them on the plate next to the bones. This was a common Monday dinner across the South, the start of a new week on a tight budget. 1 head of cabbage, 1 pack of neck bones, and the whole family ate. The pot liquor from this one was especially good, almost sweet from the cabbage. Here's something worth understanding about neck bones. For most of the 20th century, they were treated as waste. Butchers trimmed them off the larger cuts and sold them for almost nothing, or simply handed them over to whoever asked. In many grocery stores across the South, the neck bones and pig feet and hog maws sat in a separate case, sometimes near the back. The customers who bought them were almost always black. This was not an accident. Generations of black families had learned to build entire meals from the parts of the animal that plantation kitchens discarded. What started as forced scarcity became culinary knowledge that passed from mother to daughter across 2 centuries. The butcher thought he was selling scraps. The woman buying them knew she was carrying home 3 dinners. That knowledge, the understanding of what heat and time and seasoning could pull from a bone, was worth more than anything printed in a cookbook. Number 19, salmon croquettes. Few things smelled more like a black household waking up than a can of salmon hitting a hot skillet. The dish began with a single tall can of pink salmon, the cheap kind packed in its own salty liquor with the soft bones and skin still inside. The cook would crack it open and tip it into a bowl, then go in with bare hands, crushing the little vertebrae between her fingers because those bones carried calcium and nobody wasted them. In went a beaten egg, a handful of cracker crumbs, or a spoon of cornmeal, finely diced onion, and a shake of black pepper, sometimes a little chopped bell pepper for color and snap. The mixture came together cool and slightly sticky, holding the shape of a patty when pressed between 2 palms. Then the skillet, a film of hot grease, the wet hiss as each cake went down, and that smell rising through the house, briny and golden, pulling sleeping children out of their beds. They fried until the edges set into a deep mahogany crust and the kitchen window fogged at the corners, grease snapping every time the cook flipped one with the back of a fork. There was a reason this dish appeared so often, and it was not only the price. Government nutrition workers had figured that a single can of salmon mixed with a little flour and 1 egg held enough protein to unlock the niacin buried in cornmeal and ward off pellagra for a family of 4 when eaten once a week. That made it medicine that tasted like a treat. So it became Sunday food or Saturday night into Sunday food, set out beside a mound of grits or a bowl of rice with a wedge of hot sauce on the rim of the plate. Crisp and craggy outside, moist and flaky within, the little bones gone so soft that no child ever noticed them. A nickel can of fish dressed up into something worth saying grace over. Number 18, peach cobbler. This was the dish that disappeared when Ernestine Walker of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, passed in 1994. She made her cobbler with fresh peaches from a tree in her backyard, peeled by hand at the kitchen sink in an apron she had sewn herself. She sliced the peaches into a baking dish, scattered sugar, cinnamon, and a squeeze of lemon over them, then dropped spoonfuls of batter on top that spread and rose in the oven into a golden crust. The batter was flour, sugar, milk, and melted butter mixed with a fork. She didn't measure any of it. She said the batter should look like thick pancake mix and the peaches should be sweet enough to eat raw before you add a single grain of sugar. 4 grandchildren tried to recreate it after she died. None of them could. The recipe lived in her hands, and her hands were gone. Have you ever tried to write down a recipe that exists only in someone's hands? Here is what nobody talks about when we celebrate soul food. When one of these women died, the recipe died with her. Not because she was selfish, not because she was secretive, because cooking by feel cannot be written down. You cannot put a 3-count pour of evaporated milk on an index card. You cannot describe the exact color of oil that means the skillet is ready. These women carried entire libraries of knowledge in their muscle memory, and when they were gone, those libraries closed forever. You are left with a taste you remember and a dish you cannot reproduce. That is the real cost of cooking without a recipe. The food was perfect, and it was temporary. Number 23, hog jowl and black-eyed peas. Most people think of this as a New Year's dish. It was, but during the Depression and Jim Crow, it showed up on Easter tables too, in homes where a whole ham was a dream your family could not afford. Hog jowl was the cheek of the pig, 15 cents at the butcher. Black-eyed peas were 10 cents a pound. Together, they fed your whole family for a quarter. That was the entire cost of your Easter dinner, about $5.50 in today's money. Black-eyed peas were not even American. They came from West Africa, where cowpeas had been cultivated for centuries before the slave trade brought them across the ocean. Food historian Michael Twitty traced that journey in his book, The Cooking Gene, following the cowpea from the fields of Senegambia to the tables of Georgia. On your Easter Sunday, those peas symbolized coins, prosperity, hope. For a family shut out of every door America had, a pot of peas was not failure. It was a declaration. We will eat well and together no matter what.
Cornbread and buttermilk was the quiet comfort that ended many long days. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into big bowls, then poured cool buttermilk over the top until it softened. The tang met the sweetness of the corn, creating a flavor that felt like home. It was eaten slow, with a spoon, sometimes in silence, sometimes between stories. No stove was needed, no fancy ingredients, just what the house already had. It was breakfast, supper, or a midnight snack, dependable and kind. The meal cooled the body in summer and soothed the soul in winter. It reminded families that simplicity had its own kind of richness. Grandparents said it tasted best after a hard day's work, when hunger met gratitude. Cornbread and buttermilk was proof that the simplest things often held the most heart. The sound of the spoon scraping the bowl was steady, familiar, and peaceful. It was the kind of food you didn't rush, the kind that let the day fall away while you ate. Children grew up watching their elders eat it, learning that comfort didn't need sugar or spice, just love and something made by hand. Turnip greens and rice were food for the weary but nourishment for the strong. The greens, bitter on their own, mellowed into flavor when boiled down with a little fat or bone. The rice soaked up everything, turning the dish into something both filling and healing. It was simple, yes, but it carried the essence of home, steam, spice, and the rhythm of spoons against bowls. Sometimes families added bits of salt pork or even a splash of vinegar to wake up the taste. Most times, though, it was just greens and rice, humble and whole. It fed everyone, from the field hand to the school child, giving strength for another day. In kitchens lit by single bulbs and hope, this meal was not just eaten. It was shared, savored, and remembered. The steam rose from the pot like a prayer, curling in the air as laughter filled the room. It was a dish that brought silence to hunger and calm to the hardest of hearts. Turnip greens and rice were proof that nourishment did not need luxury, just patience, warmth, and a steady hand to stir the pot.
Number 12, sweet potato hush puppies. A bowl of grated sweet potato on the kitchen counter in 1944 Savannah, mixed with a cup of yellow cornmeal, a half cup of flour, an egg, a teaspoon of baking powder, enough buttermilk to bind it loose. The cook dropped the batter by a tablespoon into a skillet of hot lard. The hush puppies rolled themselves over as they fried. They came out the size of a walnut, golden brown on the outside, soft and orange in the middle, sweet without sugar. The potato did all the work. She served them with stewed catfish from the river and a wedge of lemon picked from the tree behind the house. The dish fed 5 for 11 cents. Your grandmother grew the sweet potatoes herself in a small lot behind the kitchen. The root cellar under your porch held them through winter. It was the backup pantry of every coastal Georgia household. By 1976, the deep fryer at the corner restaurant had taken over and you stopped pulling out the skillet at home. When the grocery money ran out 3 days before the check came, eggs and rice with tomato gravy kept the lights on inside the body. This was Depression-era arithmetic carried through generations of black kitchens. A dozen eggs for 30 cents in the 1940s, a cup of rice from a bulk sack, and a can of tomatoes that stretched across 2 meals. Rice cooked plain, eggs scrambled soft in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, pulled off the heat while still wet so they wouldn't turn rubbery. The tomato gravy came together in the same pan. Canned tomatoes crushed by hand, a little sugar to cut the acid, salt, and a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Everything went into one bowl. Eggs on rice, gravy over both. And for a few minutes, the kitchen smelled like someone was taking care of you, even if that someone was yourself. The old ones could tell by the color of the gravy whether it had been made with love or just made to get through.
Cornbread dressing made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition. Sweet peas with smoked turkey and onions was a quiet kind of dinner, simple but soulful. The peas simmered low in a broth kissed with smoke from leftover turkey bones, the onions melting until they turned sweet and soft. The flavor was delicate but deep, each bite carrying whispers of holidays past. It was the meal that stretched the season, turning leftovers into something new and nourishing. The peas turned tender but never mushy, their green brightness glowing against the smoky backdrop. Served with rice or warm biscuits, it was humble but proud. A dish that brought gratitude to even the smallest tables. Sweet peas with smoked turkey was more than a side. It was a supper, a moment, a memory of turning ordinary into extraordinary with just a little care. In every spoonful lived the reminder that nothing was ever wasted when love led the way. The pot simmered quietly, its scent filling the kitchen with calm. Each bowl offered peace, the kind that only slow-cooked meals can give. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes was a surprisingly tangy, humble dish that stretched every ingredient just a little further, making it a popular staple in the 1960s kitchen. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender was mixed with tomatoes stewed down until they turned soft and slightly sweet, creating a flavor that was simple yet strangely satisfying. It did not pretend to be anything fancy. It was a dish for busy parents, hungry kids, and anyone needing comfort without cost. The tang from the tomatoes mixed with the soft macaroni in a way that stuck in your memory long after childhood passed. Some families topped it with a bit of cheese, some kept it plain, but either way, it tasted warm and familiar, like a weeknight that ended well. It was a dish defined not by extravagance but by reliability, something people still crave because it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where everything was steady and safe.
Number 24, stewed ox tongue. The tongue came from the butcher wrapped in brown paper, heavy and muscular, and it went straight into a pot of boiling water with onion, bay leaves, and black peppercorns. 3 hours later, the outer skin peeled off in one sheet, revealing pale, tender meat underneath. Sliced thick and laid into a gravy of tomatoes, garlic, and thyme, the tongue simmered for another hour until the slices could be cut with a fork. The texture was unlike any other beef on the table, dense, smooth, almost creamy. In black kitchens across the rural South, tongue was a Sunday dish that required no apology and no explanation. The older women served it with pride. The children ate it without knowing what it was until they were old enough to ask. When supermarkets replaced butcher counters and customers stopped requesting whole organs, the tongue disappeared from the case and from the table at the same time. Number 17, banana pudding. If you grew up going to church suppers, you know this dessert. Every woman brought one and every child fought over it. A woman in Jackson, Mississippi, layered vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and a custard she made from scratch on the stovetop. She cooked milk, sugar, egg yolks, and a spoonful of flour in a saucepan, stirring until the mixture thickened enough to coat a spoon's back. She spread meringue on top and browned it under the broiler for exactly as long as it took her to walk to the front porch and back. That was her timer, a walk to the porch. Banana pudding traveled through the Great Migration as millions of Black Americans carried their recipes north. By the 1960s, it was a fixture at church suppers from Chicago to Detroit to Philadelphia. The homemade custard version started disappearing in the 1980s when instant pudding mix became cheaper and faster. The women who still made it from scratch became fewer every year. Number 22, smothered potatoes and onions. If there were potatoes in the bin and an onion on the counter, supper was already settled. Smothering was one of the great techniques of the Southern kitchen, a slow braise that turned the plain ingredients into something soft and savory. The cook sliced potatoes and onions thin, laid them in a heavy skillet with a spoon of bacon grease, and let them cook down low and slow with the lid on. The steam trapped under that lid did the work, melting the onions into the potatoes until the whole thing went tender and sweet. Toward the end, the lid came off so the bottom layer could brown and form that prized golden crust against the iron. A little salt, a little black pepper, and maybe a splash of water to keep it from sticking was all it took. Served with a piece of cornbread, it made a full plate without a scrap of meat. Pure comfort built from two of the cheapest things in the house. Number 25, neck bones and okra. Okra grew wild in southern gardens every summer, shooting up so fast that a missed day of picking meant woody, tough pods. But young okra, sliced thin and dropped into a pot of neck bones that had been going since morning, did something no other vegetable could. It thickened the broth on its own. The natural mucilage turned the pot liquor heavy and silky without a pinch of flour. Families across Alabama and the Mississippi Delta cooked this from June straight through September, when okra came in faster than anyone could use it fresh. The bones gave the pot its depth. The okra gave it body. Some threw in a handful of garden tomatoes to cut the thickness. Others left it alone, ladled over rice in a wide bowl. It was not gumbo. It was older than gumbo, and it asked for less.
Rice and gravy supper was simplicity perfected, the kind of dinner that proved luxury had nothing to do with money. A pot of soft, steaming rice sat waiting while the skillet worked its magic. The gravy began with drippings, saved from fried chicken, pork chops, or even a Sunday roast, scraped and stirred with a wooden spoon until the bits lifted and melted into flavor. Flour and water followed, thickening it just enough to coat the back of a spoon, and then came the pepper, plenty of it. When that golden brown gravy was ladled over rice, it turned humble grains into something rich and deeply comforting. Families gathered around the table, their worries melting away with every bite. It was food that filled more than bellies. It filled the soul with calm. Even without meat, it carried the taste of patience and love, proof that a single pan and a few ingredients could build a feast.
Number 8, potato salad. In Black families, the question who made the potato salad is not casual. It is a security check. The wrong person's potato salad at Easter dinner could ruin the entire holiday, and everybody at that table knows it. Easter potato salad was a specific production, not the mayo heavy deli version. This was mustard forward, egg studded, with sweet pickle relish that turned it a distinctive yellow. Made the day before to let the flavors meld. Served cold, 5 pounds of potatoes, 8 eggs, 1 cup of yellow mustard. The dish migrated north with the Great Migration and became standard at every Black gathering in northern cities. The designated potato salad maker in a family or church held a position of trust earned over years. You did not volunteer for that job. You were chosen. The tradition even traveled to Washington, D.C., where Easter Monday at the National Zoo became a massive gathering. By 1919, 55,000 Black Americans came to celebrate. Potato salad was there on every blanket and every table. That gathering started in 1891, the direct result of segregation at the White House Easter egg roll. Even joy had to be built from scratch.
Rice and gravy suppers were the soul of weeknight dinners, simple and satisfying. Grandparents browned whatever they had, chicken scraps, neck bones, or even onions alone, to make a base for the gravy. The drippings told the story, turning flour and water into gold. The smell was deep and comforting, rising from the pan like a promise. Hot rice waited patiently in a pot nearby, ready to soak up every drop. It was not fancy, but it was enough to fill every stomach and calm every worry. The first spoonful always tasted like home, salty and rich, carrying the flavor of care. When times were lean, the gravy was thin, but the love stayed thick. Every plate was scraped clean, nothing left behind. It was the dinner that kept families steady, warm, and thankful, proof that comfort did not need luxury, just a stove, some rice, and a little faith. It fed more than hunger. It fed hope. Grandparents knew that a good pot of gravy could fix most of life's small troubles. Sometimes it was made with leftover roast or chicken drippings saved from the night before. Other times it was built from nothing more than fat and flour, stirred until the color turned perfect. The magic was in the patience, the slow whisk, the right smell, the moment it thickened. In that moment, the kitchen turned into a place of peace. Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden clouds of comfort baked right into the heart of wartime kitchens. When sugar was scarce, families leaned on the natural sweetness of homegrown sweet potatoes. Mashed and mixed into biscuit dough, they baked up tender and fragrant, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon, smoke, and love. They were served with butter if you had it, syrup if you were lucky, or just warm from the oven if not. Each bite carried a quiet message. Life might be hard, but there was still room for sweetness. These biscuits graced church suppers, family gatherings, and small kitchen tables alike. They were food for the soul, the kind of treat that reminded families that hope was something you could taste. The golden crust flaked beneath the fingertips, and the soft center melted on the tongue like memory. Grandmothers often baked them on Sundays, saving one pan for the next morning's breakfast. Even the leftovers, if any, were treasures wrapped in cloth. They told a story of endurance sweetened by faith, of women who made miracles with nothing more than flour, fire, and heart. In those biscuits lived the taste of love passed down through generations.
Number 13, skillet cornbread with cracklings. A 12-inch cast iron skillet on a wood stove in 1942 Tuskegee. Heated until a drop of water danced across the surface. The cook rendered a half pound of pork fat into golden cracklings the day before. Set them in a tin on the back of the stove. The batter was 2 cups yellow cornmeal, 1 egg, a cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of soda. The cracklings folded in last. She poured a tablespoon of bacon grease into the hot skillet, swirled it around the sides, dropped the batter in with a hiss that brought the children in from the yard. The cornbread baked 20 minutes, came out with a brown crust thick enough to crack with a spoon. It fed 6 for 7 cents, eaten standing at the stove with a glass of cold milk. That was supper. Your grandmother kept hers in a Maxwell House tin she had saved since the war. Every kitchen in your town kept cracklings on the back of the stove. By 1985, the cracklings came in a bag from the gas station and the cornbread came from a box. You wouldn't know to ask for the real thing. Pinto beans over rice had become a different meal entirely. The flavors deeper, the broth thicker, the ham hock having given up everything it had into the liquid overnight. In Black households across the South and in northern cities where the Great Migration carried these traditions, Monday was wash day, and the beans, simmering from the day before, were reheated without ceremony. A scoop over white rice, a piece of cornbread if any was left, and dinner was done. For seniors living alone, that Sunday pot stretched to Wednesday or Thursday, each reheating, concentrating the flavor, each bowl richer than the last. A pound of dried pintos in the 1950s cost 5 cents. The rice was barely more. Together they formed a complete protein grandmothers already knew by instinct decades before nutritionists confirmed it. In southern Louisiana and East Texas, red beans followed the same Monday rhythm. The kidney beans simmered with andouille or pickled pork until the pot turned thick as mud. The leftover pot wasn't leftover at all. It was the plan.
Cranberry sauce, made from whole berries and sugar water, provided the traditional tart sweet condiment without spending money on canned versions that cost 3 times more. Black mothers would buy fresh cranberries when they appeared seasonally in grocery stores, usually paying less than $1 for a pound that made enough sauce for 20 people. The berries were simmered with sugar and water until they burst and thickened into glossy, ruby red sauce that tasted fresher and brighter than anything from cans. Some women added orange zest when citrus was affordable, while others kept it simple with just berries, sugar, and patience. The sauce could be made days ahead and actually improved with time as flavors melded, making it perfect for busy Thanksgiving preparations. Children loved the sweet tart flavor that contrasted with rich, savory dishes, while adults appreciated the burst of color and acidity that balanced heavy meals. Baked chicken legs with paprika were the kind of simple oven meal every family seemed to know by heart. The chicken legs were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a heavy dusting of paprika that turned the skin a deep red as it baked. They cooked low and slow, filling the house with that unmistakable smell of roasted chicken that drifted through every room. The skin crisped just enough, the meat stayed juicy, and the seasoning tasted familiar and warm. Families served it with mashed potatoes, rice, or whatever vegetable was around that week, but the chicken always stole the show. It was inexpensive, reliable, and delicious, the kind of dish that never tried too hard but always delivered. Kids grabbed it with both hands, adults savored the flavor, and everybody ended up licking their fingers. Even now, people crave that paprika-dusted chicken because it tasted like family, like evening routines, like the kind of homemade meal that anchors a childhood. Pork roast with brown sugar glaze was Sunday dinner perfection. The meat roasted slow, its surface brushed with a glaze of brown sugar, vinegar, and spice until the edges caramelized to dark gold. The air filled with the scent of sweetness melting into smoke, a perfume of patience and pride. The crust cracked when sliced, revealing tender meat bathed in its own juices. Families carved it together, the knife gliding through as if through memory itself. It was the centerpiece of the table, the reward for a week's labor. That glaze turned ordinary pork into something extraordinary, balancing sweetness and salt like a hymn. Every slice reminded everyone that love could be tasted, that time was the best ingredient of all. The drippings soaked into mashed potatoes or cornbread, each bite richer than the last. It was food that gathered generations, linking past and present with the sound of laughter and plates being passed. The meal lingered in memory long after it was gone, leaving behind warmth, fullness, and the quiet peace of togetherness. It was the taste of devotion, simple and eternal. Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while pot liquor became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity.
The little can had a devil on the label, and the spread inside looked like nothing you served to company, but potted meat on crackers fed more solitary dinners than anyone will admit. Potted meat, a paste of mechanically separated chicken and beef trimmings packed into a 3-ounce can, cost less than a quarter in the 1960s. It spread onto saltines with a butter knife, the texture somewhere between pâté and surrender. The taste was salty, vaguely meaty, and oddly satisfying when you stopped expecting it to be something else. Seniors kept cans stacked in kitchen cabinets beside the Vienna sausages and sardines, the holy trinity of no-cook survival. This was the dinner you ate when you didn't tell your kids what you had. When they called and asked, you said you ate fine, and you did. You ate. Whether it was fine depended on what fine meant when the house was empty and the check was still a week away. Potted meat wasn't a meal anyone chose. It was a meal that chose you. Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could.
Watermelon rind hash was a dish that proved nothing in a Southern kitchen ever truly went to waste. After the sweet red fruit was eaten down to its pale skin, the green rinds were peeled, diced, and saved for the next meal. They were boiled until soft, then tossed into a skillet with onions, peppers, and a pinch of spice. What came out of that pan was golden and glistening, sweet with a hint of salt, smelling faintly of summer rain and backyard laughter. The rind soaked up flavor like memory itself, turning something forgotten into something worth savoring. Families served it with cornbread or rice, sometimes even cold the next morning with eggs. It filled bellies when money was short and reminded everyone that resourcefulness could taste as good as plenty. The sizzle in the skillet sounded like hope, sharp and quick, the sign that something good was about to happen. Watermelon rind hash was not just food, it was gratitude on a plate. Every bite told the story of people who refused to waste even the smallest blessing. It was sweet, it was humble, and it carried the quiet genius of survival, transforming scraps into a celebration that no one ever forgot. Gizzards and rice were the meal that taught flavor from labor. Tough at first, the gizzards demanded patience, cleaned, boiled, and seasoned before ever touching the skillet. Grandparents fried them slow with onions, letting the scent of pepper and grease build into something irresistible. Once tender, they met a pot of rice, plain but proud, soaking up all that savory juice. It was not fancy, but it was rich in spirit, feeding families that refused to waste a thing. Gizzards, the part most people threw away, became the centerpiece of a dinner that stuck to the ribs. The sound of the knife chopping, the hiss of the pan, the quiet hum of the stove, all of it felt like music in a home where nothing came easy but everything was earned. It was dinner built from wisdom, not wealth. Each bite carried gratitude and grit, proof that poverty never lacked flavor.
Number 25, corn pudding. Plain cornbread, spent all year feeding the family. But on Easter Sunday, that same cornmeal got dressed up. 6 ears of fresh corn scraped into a bowl with eggs, whole milk, and real butter, baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into a custard so soft you needed a spoon to serve it. This was the dish that said humble ingredients could be sacred if you treated them right. Enslaved people had survived on cornmeal rations all year long, 1 peck per week. That was the standard. So when Easter came and a free black woman turned that same grain into something worthy of the risen Lord's Day, she was rewriting what cornmeal meant. By the 1970s, corn pudding was a standard Easter side across the South. Today, over 80% of corn pudding recipes use canned corn and Jiffy mix. The custard version, the one that required patience and fresh eggs and a kitchen that smelled like spring, has nearly vanished. Your grandmother did not need a recipe. She needed a cast iron dish and 45 minutes.
Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were the pride of thrifty kitchens. Mothers would line up bright green peppers on the counter, slicing off the tops and scooping out the seeds with care. A single pound of ground meat, beef if you were lucky, or whatever was on sale, was stretched with rice, onions, and breadcrumbs until it could feed the whole family. The mixture was packed into each pepper, standing tall in a baking dish before being smothered in tomato sauce. As it baked, the scent filled the house with warmth, tangy and savory all at once. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and dinner became something that looked fancy even when it cost next to nothing. Families gathered around the table, cutting through the soft vegetables to reveal the hearty filling inside. It was a meal that brought pride, not pity, proof that resourcefulness could taste like celebration. Every bite carried the balance of thrift and love, where nothing went to waste and everything felt like home.
Number 18, neck bones and pinto beans. Pinto beans were the workhorses of the dried bean shelf. They cost almost nothing, stored for years, and doubled in size overnight in a bowl of water. Soaked and simmered with neck bones, they turned creamy on the inside while holding their shape just enough to give the pot some texture. The broth went thick and brown, somewhere between a soup and a stew, heavy enough to coat the back of a spoon. Families in Texas and Oklahoma kept a bag of pintos in the pantry the way other households kept bread. When the pintos went into the neck bone pot, the meal stretched far enough to feed whoever showed up unannounced, because someone always did. A bowl of pinto beans and neck bones over cornbread with a raw onion sliced on the side was a supper that cost pennies and held you through a full day of work. Number 18, Hoppin' John. Born in the low country rice fields, this one-pot supper carried West Africa straight to the southern table. It came from the Gullah Geechee people of coastal South Carolina, descendants of enslaved Africans who paired the rice they knew how to grow with black-eyed peas, a legume with deep African roots. Food historians trace it back to Tibo Niebe, a Senegalese rice and bean dish, and to Wake from Ghana. The cooking was plain and forgiving. Black-eyed peas simmered with a piece of smoked pork until soft. Then rice went into the same pot to cook in that seasoned liquid until the grains drank it all up. One pot, 2 cheap staples, and a scrap of pork was enough to feed everyone at the table. By New Year's, the dish carried meaning too. The peas standing for coins and good luck in the year ahead. Filling, frugal, and rooted in history older than the South itself. Number 21, fried chicken. Every woman had her own fried chicken, and no 2 batches tasted alike. A woman in Memphis kept her seasoning mix in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. She soaked the chicken in buttermilk overnight and dredged each piece through seasoned flour, measured by the shake of her wrist and nothing else. The skillet's oil had to be exactly the right temperature, and she tested it by dropping a pinch of flour into the grease. If it sizzled and floated, the oil was ready. No thermometer, no timer. She stood at that stove and turned each piece exactly once, and she knew it was done by the sound of the sizzle, not by any clock on the wall. If you have ever walked into a kitchen where fried chicken was cooling on the counter wrapped in foil, you know what Sunday smelled like. That smell was the whole sermon. Here is what made her timing right. Every pan was different. Every batch of oil was different. She compensated without thinking about it. 23. Oxtail stew over rice. Oxtail sections were dusted with seasoned flour and browned in batches in a cast iron Dutch oven until every surface had a dark crust. Onions, garlic, thyme, and a splash of tomato paste went in next, then enough water to barely cover the bones. The lid went on and the pot moved to a low oven or the back of the stove for 4 hours. By the time the lid came off, the collagen had dissolved into the liquid, turning the broth into something that coated the spoon like varnish. The meat clung to the knobbed vertebrae in small, intensely flavored pockets that had to be worked loose with teeth and fingers. Oxtail was a Sunday staple in Black households from Jamaica to Georgia, carried across the water and adapted to whatever stove was available. The dish required nothing expensive, just time and a willingness to cook something that looked unpromising into something extraordinary. When butcher counters shrank and oxtail jumped in price from pennies a pound to one of the most expensive cuts in the case, the Sunday pot became a luxury that priced out the families who invented it. Number 10, black-eyed peas. In the South, black-eyed peas on New Year's Day meant good luck for the coming year. But in a Black kitchen, they appeared on your table almost every Sunday because they were cheap, filling, and cooked themselves. A bag of dried black-eyed peas cost less than $1 and produced enough food for 3 days. A woman in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, simmered them with a smoked ham hock, diced onion, and a can of tomatoes until the beans turned creamy and the broth thickened into something that tasted like the South's entire cooking history in one spoonful. She served them over rice with cornbread on the side. The seasoning was simple: salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and whatever the ham hock gave up during those long hours of cooking. She did not measure any of it. She tasted and adjusted, until her tongue said it was right. That tongue was the most accurate measuring instrument in the kitchen. Now, that knowledge lived only inside her body, and when she was gone, it was gone. Number 24, fried bologna. Long before it became a punchline, this was an honest meal that kept many families going. During the Depression, bologna was often the only meat a household could afford, and it was frequently the only meat on hand. Cooks would slice it thick, cut little slits around the edge so it would not dome up in the pan, and fry it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and browned. That crisp ring around the outside was the whole reward. Pressed between 2 slices of light bread with a smear of mustard, it became a sandwich that a child could carry to school or a worker could fold into a lunch pail. Sometimes it went over rice with a little gravy made from the drippings. Cheap, fast, and filling, it stretched a few cents into a real plate of food, a humble meal that asked for nothing and gave back plenty. Number 23, neck bones and mustard greens. Mustard greens had a bite that no other green in the garden could match. Raw, they burned the back of the tongue. Cooked low in a pot of neck bones for 2 hours, that burn softened into a peppery warmth that cut clean through the richness of the pork. Families in Alabama and Mississippi planted mustard greens alongside collards, but the mustard came up faster and tolerated poorer soil. The leaves were thinner, more ragged, and they shrank down to almost nothing in the pot, which meant you needed a bigger armload to fill a bowl. The pot liquor ran pale green with a sharp edge that some people preferred over the heavier, darker liquor from collards. Children who turned their noses up at the greens still sopped the liquor with cornbread because that peppery broth tasted like the bones dressed up in something new. This was a weeknight pot that asked for nothing but time, a handful of greens, and whatever neck bones the butcher had left.
Vegetable soup from kitchen scraps was pure genius born from necessity, a pot of everything and nothing all at once. Every peel, every end, every leftover carrot, potato, or onion found its way into the bubbling broth. Grandparents saved the bones from roasts, the wilted greens from salads, even a handful of noodles if there were some left behind. Those scraps met in the pot and became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The broth deepened in color and flavor with every passing hour, carrying the scent of care through the house. It was food that took time, that demanded patience, that rewarded frugality with comfort. The wooden spoon stirred slowly, pulling stories from the pot like memories rising with the steam. Kids waited, bowls in hand, as the kitchen fogged with warmth. Each bite tasted like love stretched thin but never broken. Nothing was wasted, not time, not flavor, not effort. It was a reminder that even small things, when treated with respect, could become something beautiful. Vegetable soup was a testament to endurance, to gratitude, and to the art of making enough out of almost nothing.
Number 22, deviled eggs with paprika. Every black woman at Easter had her deviled egg plate, not just any plate, a special carrier with little indentations for each egg half. She carried it to church like a crown, because on Easter Sunday, your eggs were judged. The differences were subtle but deadly serious. Ratio of mustard to mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, or dill, how much paprika went on top. The first known deviled egg recipe appeared in 1877 in the Montgomery Advertiser in Alabama. By the mid-20th century, a dozen eggs cost about 60 cents. Those vintage egg plates from the 1950s and 1960s now sell for $25 to $75 on collector markets. The dish had a practical origin too. After weeks of Lent, your family had accumulated hard-boiled Easter eggs that needed eating. But the real reason deviled eggs mattered was simpler than that. They were one of the few pieces of fancy serving ware that working class Black women owned. Presentation was everything. Adrian Miller, the James Beard Award-winning soul food historian, has called deviled eggs one of the clearest shared traditions across the Southern racial divide, a rare point of commonality. That small truth mattered.
Neckbone stew was the dish that made patience taste like home. Grandparents started it early, browning the bones slow until the house filled with the smell of salt, pepper, and smoke. The meat was tough at first, but they knew that time could turn even the hardest cuts tender. A pot of onions, celery, and carrots followed, simmering until the broth grew deep and rich. The bones gave flavor to everything they touched, the fat melting into gold that coated every spoonful. Sometimes potatoes joined the mix, sometimes rice, but the heart of the dish was always the same, making something out of what others overlooked. The stew bubbled for hours, humming low like a hymn on the stove. By supper, the meat slipped free from the bone, soft and ready. It fed everyone, from children to elders, warming stomachs and spirits alike. Neckbone stew was not just food, it was proof that care could turn scarcity into comfort. Every bite held a memory of waiting, stirring, tasting, and sharing. It taught that good things come slow and that nothing was ever too little when cooked with love. In every bowl lived the story of endurance, flavor, and faith that kept families strong through every hard season. Macaroni and cheese made from scratch with government cheese became the creamy casserole that turned welfare assistance into something families served with pride. Government commodity cheese, distributed through assistance programs, came in large blocks that creative mothers transformed into dishes that tasted better than store-bought. The cheese had unique texture and sharp flavor that melted beautifully when combined with evaporated milk, eggs, and elbow macaroni bought in bulk. Women layered the mixture in large baking dishes, topping it with extra cheese and sometimes breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The result was dense, creamy mac and cheese that could feed 20 people with just 2 boxes of pasta and 1 block of government cheese. Children loved it because the cheese pulled into strings with each serving. This wasn't bland, watery mac and cheese from boxes, but rich custard-like casserole that required skill to perfect. Black mothers took pride in their mac and cheese recipes. Collard green and cornmeal bake was the best kind of fusion, 2 Southern staples baked into one soulful dish. The collards, cooked down with onion and seasoning, were folded into cornmeal batter rich with eggs and milk. When it came out of the oven, the top was crisp, golden, and fragrant, the inside soft and savory. It was the flavor of comfort layered with ingenuity. The greens added depth, the cornmeal brought warmth, and together they made something entirely new. Families served it beside stews or on its own, each bite tasting like home and heritage combined. It was a dish that stretched across generations, tying together the old ways and the new table. Collard green and cornmeal bake was proof that tradition did not stand still. It evolved, always with love. The scent alone felt like memory reborn, a blend of hearth and heritage. It was Southern creativity at its finest, built on wisdom that refused to waste or forget. In every golden slice lived the heartbeat of family and the story of perseverance. It fed more than hunger. It fed pride, reminding everyone that humble ingredients could rise to greatness. It was the kind of food that tasted like resilience itself, baked into every crumb. Spam and fried potatoes was the sort of meal that turned thrift into something craveable. Spam cubes hit the skillet with a hiss, browning into salty, crispy little bites that tasted far richer than their price potatoes sliced thin and cooked alongside them soaked up every bit of flavor, turning golden at the edges and soft in the center. It was a skillet meal that came together fast, fed everyone well, and filled the house with a smell that was impossible to forget. Families made it because it was easy, cheap, and satisfying, but they kept making it because it tasted like home. The combination of textures, the crackle of the potatoes, and the deep, savory bite of the Spam all worked together better than anyone expected. Kids saw it as a treat, adults saw it as practical, and everyone saw it as a kind of magic born from a can and a pan. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like childhood, like simpler times, and like pure comfort. Turkey wing pot roast turned thrift into triumph, stretching a few wings into a meal that could feed many. Grandma browned them first, the skin crisping under the heat before she laid them into the pan with carrots, onions, and potatoes. A little water, a pinch of spice, and time did the rest. Hours later, the kitchen smelled like heaven, rich, savory, and full of promise. The meat fell from the bone with the gentlest touch, the gravy glistening across the vegetables. It was not expensive, but it was everything a meal should be, filling, flavorful, and full of care. Families gathered, hungry and happy, their plates warm and their spirits lifted. Turkey wing pot roast was proof that even the least celebrated parts could shine when cooked with love. It was patience turned into flavor, comfort baked into tradition, and every bite whispered that nothing made by hand was ever humble. Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special, allowing Black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist, even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted.
Number 23. Chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for a nickel a pound, sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the pot liquor, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today.
Turkey necks with gravy turned what many ignored into something worth craving. Grandparents browned the necks first, letting them sizzle in a pan until the air filled with a smoky richness. A bit of flour, water, and thyme turned the drippings into thick brown gravy that coated every piece like velvet. The meat cooked for hours until it slipped clean off the bone, tender and rich with flavor. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it looked simple but tasted like a feast. The necks may have been cheap, but the love behind them was priceless. Grandparents made the most of what they had, and this meal proved their creativity and care. The gravy was the best part, seasoned just right, spooned generously so nothing went to waste. Everyone at the table ate slow, grateful for the warmth, the smell, and the moment. It was Sunday flavor on a weekday budget, the taste of making do without feeling poor. Turkey necks with gravy were more than a meal. They were a celebration of resilience and resourcefulness that lived in every kitchen where pride cooked alongside hunger.
Number 20, hoghead cheese. In Louisiana, the butcher made a special Easter batch. Hoghead cheese was not cheese at all. It was a cold-cut terrin made from boiled pig parts. Head, feet, ears, tongue, all of it simmered until the natural gelatin from the bones set the meat into a mold. Vinegar kept it preserved. You sliced it thin and spread it on saltines, or stuffed it into a po' boy, or cubed it and ate it like actual cheese. The Poche family of Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, has been making hoghead cheese commercially since 1962. They are one of the last traditional operations in the state. The number of Louisiana butcher shops making house-made hoghead cheese for Easter has declined by an estimated 70% since the 1980s. This was the ultimate expression of making something from nothing. The parts of the animal nobody else wanted turned into something so good that butchers sold it in special Easter molds because even scraps deserve to be celebrated. Today, it sells for $8 to $10 a pound. If you are under 40, you have probably never tasted it.
Cabbage and sausage skillet was the kind of dinner that turned struggle into satisfaction. A single head of cabbage, cheap and sturdy, could feed a whole family when paired with a few slices of sausage or hot dogs. Grandmothers fried the sausage first, letting the grease flavor the pan, then tossed in ribbons of cabbage that sizzled and softened. The sound of it frying was enough to make mouths water, a tune of thrift and triumph. The smell filled the house, smoky, savory, and sweet all at once. Potatoes or onions sometimes joined the mix, stretching it further while adding depth. Served hot from the skillet, it was hearty and humble, with each bite carrying flavor far greater than its cost. This meal didn't come from plenty, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Families ate together, full and grateful, proving that good food didn't need much, only love, heat, and a little time.
Number 15, neck bones and field peas. Field peas are smaller and earthier than black-eyed peas, with a mineral taste that comes from the iron in the soil where they grew. They were a garden staple across the rural South, and when the fresh pods came in during summer, families shelled them on the porch in the evening and cooked them the next morning with whatever bones were in the house. Neck bones and field peas made a pot that could be served 3 ways across a week. The first night, straight from the pot with cornbread. The second night, over rice with hot sauce. The third night, mashed up and reheated in a skillet with a little bacon grease until the edges got crispy. That third version, the fried down leftovers, was sometimes the best one. Nothing in the pot changed, only the method changed and the meal felt new each time. Number 23, hot water cornbread. When other supplies ran out, this was the meal that stood between a family and an empty stomach. The recipe could not be simpler. Cornmeal, a little salt, a spoon of fat, and boiling water stirred in until it formed a soft dough. The cook patted it into small cakes by hand and dropped them into a skillet of sizzling grease where they fried up crisp and golden on the outside and tender in the middle. Made with only cornmeal, water, and salt, it was the emergency supper when the cupboard was nearly bare. It went alongside a pot of greens to sop up the pot liquor, or it stood alone with a slice of onion when there was nothing else. Quick, simple, and filling, it carried families through the leanest stretch of the Great Depression. A few cents a meal turned into bread that ate like a meal. Number 11, ham hocks and greens. A smoked ham hock cost 35 cents in 1975 and existed for one purpose: to give flavor to a pot of greens. A woman in rural Mississippi dropped 2 ham hocks into a pot of water at dawn, let them simmer until the broth turned smoky and rich. then added turnip greens she had picked from the garden that morning. She cooked them together for 3 hours until the greens were tender and the meat was falling off the bone. The pot liquor, that broth at the bottom, was considered the most nourishing part of the meal. Some women drank it straight from a cup. Others soaked cornbread in it until the bread dissolved. The ham hock was the cheapest cut in the store, but in the right kitchen, it was the most valuable because it made everything it touched taste better. One ham hock flavored an entire pot of greens that fed a family of 8. That math was a whole point. Number 13, chitlins. Chitterlings required a full day before they ever touched the stove. Cleaned, scraped, and rinsed in cold water over and over until the water ran clear, they demanded a level of preparation that no other cut of pork required. Once clean, the intestines were cut into short lengths, placed into a large pot with onion, garlic, bay leaves, red pepper flakes, and apple cider vinegar, and simmered for 4 to 5 hours. The smell was unmistakable and unapologetic. It filled the house and drifted into the yard, and anyone who grew up in a household that cooked chitlins knew that smell meant Sunday. The finished product was tender, chewy, and deeply savory, served with hot sauce and vinegar on the side. Chitlins were the most labor-intensive Sunday meal in the black kitchen and the most divisive. You either grew up eating them or you did not, and there was rarely a middle ground. When the younger generation refused the cleaning work and the smell, the pot stopped appearing, and a tradition that stretched back to slavery ended at the kitchen door. Number 13, smothered turkey wings. A pound of fresh turkey wings cost 19 cents at the meat counter in 1957. Most white shoppers passed the wings by because they didn't know what to do with them. Your grandmother knew exactly what to do. She washed the wings in cold water, dredged them in flour, seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a pinch of poultry seasoning, and browned them in a skillet of bacon grease until the skin was crisp like paper. Then the wings went into a deep pot with 2 yellow onions, 3 stalks of celery, and 4 cups of water. The lid went on. The pot simmered on the back burner for 2.5 hours. By supper time, the meat was falling off the bone and the broth had turned into a thick mahogany gravy. She served the wings over rice with the gravy ladled across both. 6 children licked their fingers clean. You'd watch the wing bones get picked over twice. Number 21, neck bone and potato stew. Potatoes were the great stretcher. When the neck bones alone were not enough to fill the table, you cut up 4 or 5 russet potatoes and dropped them into the pot. They soaked up the broth and broke down at the edges, thickening everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. Families who had moved north to Chicago and Detroit during the Great Migration kept this meal alive in cramped apartment kitchens. The pot was smaller, but the method was the same. You browned the bones, covered them with water, seasoned them, and waited. The potatoes went in during the last hour. When they were soft enough to mash against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon, dinner was ready.
Creamed peas on toast was the quiet triumph of the thrifty kitchen, where love turned scarcity into satisfaction. When meat ran out, mothers reached for canned peas, butter, and a little flour to make magic happen. The butter melted into the pan, bubbling with the promise of warmth, and a spoonful of flour thickened it into a creamy roux. A splash of milk turned everything smooth and velvety, coating each green pea in a blanket of comfort. The toast, simple white bread browned on a pan or in the oven, waited like a canvas for the sauce to spill across it. The smell was gentle, buttery, and sweet, the kind that made a house feel like home. It was a meal made in minutes but remembered for years. Families sat together at small tables, passing plates with gratitude and quiet joy. It was humble, yes, but never empty. It fed both hunger and hope. Creamed peas on toast was more than a supper. It was a reminder that gentleness in cooking could make even the hardest days feel soft again. Smothered chicken backs were proof that nothing went to waste in a smart kitchen. The backs were the cheapest part of the bird, bony and overlooked, but in careful hands they became tender miracles. Grandparents fried them first in a cast-iron pan, browning the skin to perfection. The drippings turned into gravy, flour, water, and a slow stir until thick and golden. The chicken went back in, simmering until the meat slipped off the bone and the gravy clung to every piece. The smell was deep and familiar, the kind that pulled everyone to the table. A pot of rice sat nearby, waiting to catch all that flavor. It was food born from thrift, yet full of pride. Every bite told the same story, of making do, of feeding many from a little, of turning scraps into something worthy of thanks.
Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low-country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash. Rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. A tin key, a slow peel of metal, and the sharp smell of oil and salt, sardines and crackers with hot sauce needed no stove and no explanation. In black households across the South, a can of sardines was a full meal eaten standing at the counter or sitting by the window with a sleeve of saltines and a bottle of Louisiana or Crystal. They came packed in mustard sauce, tomato sauce, or plain oil, and every person had their preference, argued about with the same conviction as church denominations. You ate them one at a time, laid across a cracker, dotted with hot sauce, followed by a sip of something cold. During the 1950s and 60s, a tin cost 10 or 15 cents, making it one of the cheapest proteins on the shelf. For elderly folks living alone, sardines were dinner on nights when cooking felt like too much and the body just needed fuel. No pan to wash, no grease to cool, just a tin, a knife, and the quiet rhythm of feeding yourself when nobody else was coming to the table.
String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender, but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans. Okra gumbo with chicken and sausage was a pot of history simmered low and slow. The okra thickened the broth until it glistened, holding the flavors of smoked sausage, tender chicken, and seasoned stock. Each spoonful was a journey, layers of spice and comfort meeting in the middle. Families stirred that gumbo for hours, wooden spoons tracing generations into the pot. When poured over white rice, it became more than dinner. It was identity, culture, and care in one bowl. The smell filled the house with warmth, the kind that made strangers feel like kin. Every bite carried rhythm and resilience, a melody made edible. Gumbo was never just food, it was legacy, patience, and pride boiled together. It reminded people who they were, where they came from, and how love could turn hardship into flavor. The roux browned slow, the okra softened, and the sausage lent its smoke until everything sang in harmony. In each bowl lived stories of migration, survival, and celebration, tied together by spice and soul. Chicken pot pie, whether frozen from the store or made from scratch at home, felt like a small luxury in the 1960s kitchen. The golden crust, flaky and warm, opened up to a creamy filling of chicken, peas, and carrots that tasted far richer than its price. Kids treated it like a special treat, watching steam rise as the crust cracked open. Parents appreciated that it fed everyone without requiring much work, especially on colder evenings. It was a dish that felt celebratory even on ordinary days, and for many, that bubbling filling remains one of the strongest edible memories from childhood. The smell alone made the house feel cozier, like the walls were holding in a little more warmth than usual. Families often gathered around the table a bit faster when pot pie was involved, eager for that first spoonful that blended soft vegetables with tender chicken. Even now, one bite can bring back entire scenes from the past, the kind lit by soft kitchen lights and the hum of a quiet night settling in.
Number 25, smothered rabbit. In the rural South, a rabbit caught Saturday morning became Sunday dinner without anyone thinking twice about it. The rabbit was cut into pieces, dredged in seasoned flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet. Then onions went in, a cup of broth, and the lid came down for 2 hours. The meat turned tender enough to fall off the bone, sitting in a thick brown gravy that tasted like the woods it came from. Rabbit was leaner than chicken and carried a mild, earthy sweetness that no farm bird could match. Families in Mississippi, Alabama, and East Texas kept rabbit on a Sunday table well into the 1970s. The boys trapped them or shot them with a .22 in the fields behind the house. When fewer families hunted and grocery stores offered no replacement, the dish left the kitchen and never came back. Number 25, neck bones and rice. This was the dish that proved a family could eat well on the scraps the butcher almost threw away. Pork neck bones were the bones left after the good cuts were sold off, sold cheap because there was barely a bite of meat clinging to them. But black Southern cooks knew the secret was the long simmer. They covered those bones in water, dropped in an onion and a little garlic, and let the pot go for 2 or 3 hours until the meat fell off and the broth turned dark and rich. Then they cooked the rice right in that stock, so every grain soaked up the flavor of the bone. What looked like nothing on a cutting board became a steaming bowl that filled a grown man up after a day in the field. The trick was patience, not money, tender meat, savory rice, and a broth worth keeping. A whole supper out of what others called waste. Number 14, neck bones and corn. There were 2 versions of this dinner, and which one showed up depended on the calendar. In the summer, when fresh corn came off the stalk in the early morning before the sugar turned to starch, whole ears went straight into the pot alongside neck bones that had been building flavor since noon. The cobs released a natural sweetness into the broth that balanced the salt and smoke of the pork. You ate the corn off the cob with your hands, then drank the broth from the bowl. In the winter, families reached for dried corn that had been shelled and stored in cloth sacks, or canned corn from the pantry shelf. Dried corn needed an overnight soak before it was any use in a pot, and it never matched the sweetness of fresh, but it gave the broth a starchy weight that fresh corn could not. The winter version came out thicker, heavier, closer to a stew. The summer version ran lighter, almost celebratory, the kind of meal families looked forward to when the first ears appeared. What set this dinner apart was not the cooking, it was geography. Corn grew in almost every county in the South, good soil or poor, flat ground or hilly. You did not need a productive garden to grow corn. You needed a patch of dirt and enough rain. That meant every family, regardless of how little land they had access to, could put corn and neck bones on the table at least part of the year. It was the most widely available meal in the rural southern kitchen, and it carried the taste of summer even when it came from a jar in the middle of January. The families who grew their own corn picked it at dawn before the heat changed the flavor and cooked it the same day. That freshness was the line between a decent pot and one people remembered 30 years later. Here is the part that nobody in the food industry talks about: the cuts that poor black families survived on for generations. The neck bones and oxtails and pig feet are now expensive. What used to be the cheapest thing in the meat case, the parts nobody else wanted, started showing up on restaurant menus with new names and high prices. Chefs in Brooklyn and Austin and Portland discovered what grandmothers in Mississippi had known since the 1800s, that low and slow turns a cheap bone into something extraordinary. The prices followed. Today, neck bones can cost several dollars a pound in many grocery stores. Oxtails, which used to be given away, now sit among the most expensive cuts in the case. The families who built their survival around these cuts are being priced out of their own food tradition. That is not nostalgia, that is economics. And it explains why so many of these dinners are disappearing from the tables where they were invented. Number 9, pound cake. In a black church, being known as the woman who made the best pound cake was a title that outranked deacon. It was earned through decades of perfection, and the recipe died with you unless you chose to pass it on. The Easter pound cake followed the original formula: 1 pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. No baking powder, no baking soda, no leavening at all. The rise came entirely from beating air into the eggs by hand. 30 to 45 minutes of beating before electric mixers became common in the 1950s. That was 1 pound of butter, 4 sticks, about 8 to 10 eggs. Among Gullah Geechee communities in the South Carolina Lowcountry, pound cake recipes were never written down. They were memorized through years of watching and helping. Ron Dace, a Gullah Geechee cultural preservationist from St. Helena Island, has worked to document these recipes before the last generation of bakers who hold them passes away. The modern pound cake is lighter, leavened, often from a box mix. It is a fundamentally different product. The original required arms that did not quit. That was the whole secret. Here is what most people do not realize about Black Easter food. There were 2 Easters: church Easter and home Easter. Church Easter was the public performance. You showed up in your finest clothes. The choir sang. The sermon connected resurrection to liberation. After the service, the potluck tables held deviled eggs, banana pudding, potato salad, pound cake, made by the best cooks in the congregation, and everyone knew who they were. Home Easter was different. Home Easter was the ham curing since November, the oxtails braising since dawn, the greens simmering since the night before, the caramel cake that took 3 attempts to get the icing right. Home Easter was where the real cooking happened, away from the church lady's judgment, where your grandmother could take her time and cook what her grandmother taught her. The potluck fed the community. The home table fed your soul. Both are vanishing. The potluck because churches are shrinking. The home table because families are scattered. 2 Easters, both nearly gone.
Hoover stew was the meal that kept families fed when the pantry looked bare and the paychecks had stopped. It was a pot of survival, bubbling with whatever a family could gather, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, and slices of hot dog that stretched further than anyone thought possible. Every house had its own version, passed along like a secret recipe of endurance. Sometimes it was soupy, sometimes thick enough to stand a spoon in, but always hearty. Mothers would stir the pot with tired hands, humming gospel songs as the smell of tomato and salt filled the room. The macaroni swelled, the hot dogs bobbed like little treasures, and children waited with bowls clutched tight. It was the taste of making do, of not giving up when cupboards were empty and spirits low. Hoover stew was more than a meal. It was proof that a little imagination could turn struggle into supper, and that warmth came as much from hope as it did from heat.
Number 14, Sunday neck bones with rice and pot liquor, the dish that anchored the family table from Mississippi to Memphis, a blue speckled roaster on a coal range in 1949 Greenwood, 4 pounds of pork neck bones rinsed and salted, laid in a single layer. The cook poured a quart of water over them, added 1 yellow onion sliced rough, 3 garlic cloves crushed under a knife, a bay leaf, a long shake of black pepper. She covered the pot with a heavy iron lid, slid it to the back burner. The heat ran low. For 3 hours, the neck bones rendered their fat. The bones gave up their marrow into a dark, glossy pot liquor. The kitchen smelled like every Sunday she could remember from her own mother's kitchen in Yazoo City. The same smell rose at the same hour from every black household for 1,000 miles. The rice cooked in a separate pot with the broth and a teaspoon of lard. The bones came out. She laid them on a platter under a clean dish towel. The gravy was thickened with a slurry of flour and cold water. She served the rice in a bowl, ladled pot liquor into the center, piled the meat from the bones on top, a side of stewed cabbage with bacon ends. The Sunday after the funeral, she made it for 35 people in the church basement. 9 pounds of neck bones. The butcher sold her for $2 and a kind word about her late husband. The pot liquor that day fed mourners who had not eaten since Friday afternoon. By 1990, the supermarket had stopped stocking neck bones that big. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1955. The dish was the working answer to a paycheck that ran out before payday. It wasn't the recipe that died, it was the cut. A cook could buy 4 pounds for a quarter once. You can't find them at all now. You can't even ask the butcher. That's how a tradition disappears without anyone noticing the day it left. A half pound of ground beef could become a full dinner if you knew what to do with the grease left behind. Hamburger steak and onion gravy stretched cheap meat into something that smelled like a Sunday kitchen on a Wednesday night. The beef was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, shaped into a thick oval patty, and pan-fried in cast iron until browned on both sides. The patty came out, sliced onions went into the same grease, cooking down until soft and golden. A spoonful of flour stirred into the fat, then water or broth added slowly while scraping the bottom. That's where the flavor lived, in the fond, in the bits that stuck. The gravy thickened, dark and rich. The patty went back in to simmer until tender and served over white rice. It was a complete meal for under $1. Seniors who cooked this alone often made enough gravy to save poured over toast the next morning, it became breakfast too. The women who perfected this gravy never measured the flour. They watched the color and knew.
Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, but after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions. Butter beans and ham bones simmered slow and steady, filling kitchens with a smoky sweetness that wrapped around the heart. The beans softened in a broth rich with salt, pepper, and the deep flavor of ham bones saved from Sunday dinners. The liquid thickened as it cooked, turning creamy without cream, smooth and savory all at once. Each spoonful felt like nourishment and memory combined. It was a working family's supper, simple, steady, and warm. Grandma served it with rice or a piece of hot cornbread, the kind that crumbled just right into the beans. It fed bellies and soothed worries, a humble dish that stretched further than anyone expected. Butter beans and ham bone were proof that leftovers could lead to greatness, that love could season better than any spice. Each bowl carried the spirit of resourcefulness, the kind that turned scraps into sustenance and made the table a place of peace. Sweet pea and potato casserole was one of those gentle, unassuming dishes that fed families through tight budgets and busy lives. It came together from pantry staples: canned peas, diced potatoes, a bit of cream or broth, and whatever seasoning happened to be nearby. Once baked, it softened into a creamy, comforting dish that tasted like warmth itself. It was not bold, not spicy, not dramatic, but it did not need to be. It was the kind of food that sat quietly on the table, filling plates and stomachs without fanfare. Kids often pushed peas around their plates only to realize, bite by bite, that the casserole actually tasted pretty good. Adults appreciated that it stretched ingredients far enough to feed everyone while still feeling whole. It tasted like a memory of soft kitchen light and evenings that moved slowly. Even now, there is something deeply soothing about the simplicity of peas and potatoes baked together, reminding people that comfort does not need to be complicated.
Number 14, butter beans with ham hock. A smoked ham hock went into a deep pot with dried butter beans that had soaked overnight in cold water. The pot was filled, covered, and set on a low flame that would not be touched for 3 hours. The ham hock did all the work. As it cooked, the smoke and salt leached out of the bone and into the liquid, and the fat under the skin melted into the broth and gave it a sheen that no seasoning could replicate. The beans swelled slowly, absorbing that smoky water until each one was creamy inside and heavy with flavor. By the time the pot was ready, the ham hock had given everything it had. The meat around the bone was pulled off in shreds and stirred back into the beans. The bone itself, stripped clean, was sometimes left in the pot on the table as proof of what had flavored the meal. The broth had reduced into something thick enough to hold a spoon upright, and the beans sat in it like small pillows, each one soft enough to crush against the roof of the mouth. Butter beans and a ham hock fed a family for less than $1 in the years when $1 still meant something. The dish showed up on Sunday tables across the Black South, not because anyone chose it from a list of options, but because it was what the pantry allowed. A bag of dried beans lasted months. A ham hock cost almost nothing. Together, They made a meal that filled every bowl on the table and left enough in the pot for Monday. When smoked ham hocks grew scarce at the grocery counter and dried beans lost ground to canned alternatives, the long Sunday pot of butter beans became something people remembered eating rather than something they still made. There is a reason most of these dinners involve pork. It was not preference, it was economics. After emancipation, Black families in the South had access to the parts of the hog that plantation owners did not want: the feet, the tail, the ears, the stomach, the jowl, the backbone. These were handed down, sold cheap, or left behind. A whole tradition of slow cooking grew out of necessity. These cuts were tough, unfamiliar to most American palates, and required hours of heat to become edible. The women who figured out how to turn them into Sunday dinner were solving a problem that nobody else was willing to acknowledge existed. They were feeding families on what the market called waste, and they made it taste better than what the market called premium. Number 14, smothered chicken. Smothering was a technique that belonged to Black Southern kitchens the way braising belonged to French ones. A woman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, seasoned chicken pieces with a spice blend she kept in a mason jar and dredged them in flour. She fried them golden, then made a gravy in the same skillet using the drippings, more flour, onions, and chicken broth. She put the chicken back in, covered the skillet, and let everything simmer until the chicken was so tender it fell apart when you looked at it. The gravy soaked into the flour coating and the meat, and the result was a dish that tasted like fried chicken, and gravy had merged into a single thing. Nobody measured the broth. Nobody timed the simmer. You watched the gravy and listened to the pan, and when the bubbling slowed to a gentle murmur, the chicken was done. This dish required patience and attention, two things that cannot be written into a recipe. Here is why the cooking by feel tradition disappeared. Grandmothers learned by standing next to their own mothers for years, watching, tasting, adjusting. That apprenticeship happened naturally when families lived close together and Sunday dinner was the center of the week. But when families spread out, when the young moved to cities, when Sunday stopped being a day of rest and became a day of errands, the apprenticeship ended. You could not learn the feel of biscuit dough through a phone call from 3 states away. You could not learn the color of properly seasoned oil through a text message. The knowledge required presence, and presence became a luxury that modern life couldn't afford. Instant mixes and boxed meals filled the gap, but they did not fill the loss.
Potato soup with onions and milk was the meal that could fix almost anything. When the cupboards were nearly bare and payday was still far away, this humble soup stood like a quiet hero. A few potatoes, an onion, and a bit of milk were all it took to fill stomachs and calm worries. The smell of onions sizzling in butter or bacon grease drifted through the kitchen, wrapping the room in comfort. Potatoes were peeled and chopped, dropped into a bubbling pot of water, and left to soften until the broth turned cloudy and fragrant. A splash of milk turned it silky, while salt and pepper gave it life. Some added a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Others tossed in a scrap of leftover ham or a pat of butter for richness. It was simple, cheap, and perfect, made not to impress but to sustain. Grandparents called it poor man's cream soup, yet no one felt poor eating it. It was warm, filling, and tasted like kindness itself. Around the table, spoons clinked against bowls, laughter echoed between bites, and for a moment, the world outside felt manageable. Potato soup was more than food. It was faith in a pot, made from little but meaning everything. Cabbage and potatoes with fatback was the kind of dinner that came from both patience and pride. It started with simple ingredients, just a head of cabbage, a few potatoes, and a piece of salted pork. But it ended up tasting like something far grander. The fatback sizzled first in the pan, releasing its smoky aroma that filled the house and made stomachs growl. Then came the cabbage and potatoes, frying and steaming together until tender and glistening. The salty richness from the pork flavored every bite, turning two humble vegetables into a full meal. It was a one-pan supper that needed no extras, no fancy seasoning, just time and care. Families cooked it when payday was still far away, yet it always brought a sense of comfort. This was food that worked hard to remind people they were still home, still together, and still able to make something beautiful from what little they had. Smothered rabbit and gravy was the kind of dish that spoke of countryside living, of early mornings and quiet prayers before supper. Rabbits were not store-bought meat. They were caught or traded, dressed by hand, seasoned by instinct. The meat browned in iron skillets, searing until the edges crackled, then bathed in gravy thickened from drippings and flour. The smell alone could pull a family to the table before grace was said. The gravy soaked into rice or mashed potatoes, blending with the tender meat into something both wild and homebound. It was more than food. It was a skill, an art passed down by those who knew how to make something grand from what the earth offered. For those who grew up on smothered rabbit, it was a taste of legacy, not luxury. Every forkful carried the rhythm of survival and the softness of care. It was slow, steady cooking, the kind that taught patience, gratitude, and love in every stirring of the pot. Fried bologna steaks were the kind of dinner that proved you did not need expensive meat to feel like you were eating something special. Thick-cut slices of bologna hit the pan with a sizzle, curling at the edges as the heat transformed them from simple lunch meat into something smoky, savory, and downright irresistible. Families would score the edges so they stayed flat, pressing them down like a short-order cook working the grill at a busy diner. Once browned and sizzling, those slices went onto a plate beside potatoes or toast, turning an ordinary night into something that tasted hearty and satisfying. The smell drifted through the whole house, warm and salty and impossible to ignore. Kids loved watching the slices puff up. Adults loved how far a single pack could stretch, and everyone loved how it tasted a lot fancier than it actually was. It was thrift done right, the kind that created a meal so memorable you still think about it decades later. No matter how simple the ingredients were, fried bologna steaks felt like real food, the kind of meal that told you everything was going to be okay.
Number 15, country-style steak smothered in onion gravy. Cube steak or round steak, pounded flat, seasoned, dredged in flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet. Then sliced onions went in, a cup of water, and the lid came down. 2 hours later, the steak was tender enough to pull apart with a fork, swimming in thick brown onion gravy that tasted like it had been building all week. Across the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, this was the dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a roast. The cut was cheap and the technique did all the work. Served with mashed potatoes and a spoonful of gravy over everything, it felt like a bigger meal than it was. Country-style steak disappeared when cube steak stopped appearing in the meat case at smaller stores. The chains consolidated their cuts, and this one did not survive. Number 23, collard greens. If you walked into a black kitchen on a Sunday morning and did not smell greens simmering with the smoked ham hock, something was wrong. Collard greens were the backbone of the Sunday table, and the recipe existed only in the hands of the woman stirring the pot. She started with the ham hock, dropped into a deep pot of water. She added vinegar, whichever bottle she grabbed first. She tore the collard leaves off the stems by hand, washed them 3 times in cold water, and packed them into the pot so tightly the lid barely closed. Then she cooked them low and slow for 3 hours until the leaves turned silky and the pot liquor at the bottom became the richest broth you ever tasted. The seasoning was salt, pepper, a little sugar to cut the bitterness, and whatever else her mother's hands had taught her. No two women made their greens the same way, and if you asked which version was best, you would start an argument that still has not been settled. Number 12, neck bone and rutabaga stew. Rutabagas are ugly. They look like oversized turnips with waxy purple skin, and most people walking through a grocery store today would not know what to do with one. But Depression-era Black families knew. You peeled them, cubed them, and put them in the pot with neck bones. They cooked down slower than potatoes, held their shape longer, and had a slightly bitter, earthy flavor that stood up to the richness of the pork. Rutabaga stew was a cold weather meal in the rural South, especially in the hill country of northern Alabama and North Mississippi, where rutabagas grew well in rocky soil. This is one of the meals on this list that genuinely faded. Younger generations did not learn to cook with rutabagas because they did not grow up seeing them in the kitchen. Number 24, crackling bread. If your family rendered their own lard, you knew this bread. Cracklings were the crispy golden bits left behind after the fat cooked out of the pork. You folded them into cornbread batter and baked the whole thing in a cast iron skillet slicked with bacon drippings. Every bite had a tiny burst of salt and crunch buried in the corn. The standard weekly ration for an enslaved person included 3 to 4 pounds of pork and a peck of cornmeal. Crackling bread was the meal that stretched both to their absolute limit. It fed a whole family on what a wealthier table would have scraped into the trash. Abby Fisher, born enslaved in Alabama, included cornbread variations in her 1881 cookbook published in San Francisco. She could not read or write. Every recipe was dictated from memory to friends who transcribed them. After the Great Migration pulled Black families into cities where nobody slaughtered their own hogs, the cracklings disappeared. And when the cracklings disappeared, so did the bread. It was poverty turned into genius, gone when the poverty left.
Homemade fish cakes were the ocean's gift to frugal kitchens and clever cooks. Canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna became something special when mixed with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and egg. The mixture was formed into patties, pressed firm between flour-dusted palms, and dropped into hot oil where they hissed and crackled. The smell filled the kitchen with a salty promise, the kind that made you feel rich no matter what the bank said. Each patty fried to a perfect golden brown, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of potatoes, they were a complete meal, cheap, filling, and full of pride. The secret was in the seasoning, often passed down from memory. A pinch of salt, a touch of mustard, maybe a shake of pepper. They were proof that good food came from care, not cost. Every bite was a reminder that a clever cook could make the simplest pantry taste like a banquet. Canned tuna casserole brought the 1970s pantry to life. A single can of tuna, a can of cream soup, a handful of noodles, and a little imagination turned into something hearty and warm. Grandparents stirred it all together, added a sprinkle of breadcrumbs on top, and baked it until it bubbled golden. The smell of the oven filled the house with comfort and memory. It was a one-pan miracle that fed everyone without complaint. Kids loved the creamy texture. Adults loved that it stretched the grocery dollar. Tuna casserole was proof that convenience could still taste like care, that even in hard times a meal could feel special. Every bite carried the warmth of family and the cleverness of making do. It was the kind of dish that filled the kitchen with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of spoons. The top crust gave a little crunch, while the inside stayed silky and rich. It felt like a feast, even when made from cans and boxes. Some families added peas or onions for color. Others topped it with crushed crackers instead of breadcrumbs. However it was made, it never failed to satisfy. It reminded everyone that even small things, when cooked with heart, could feel like abundance. Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option, and that love could be fried up right alongside supper.
Number 24, hoe cakes with sorghum molasses, a black iron griddle on a kerosene stove in 1944 Tuskegee, smoking hot, bacon grease pooled in the center. The batter was cornmeal, salt, hot water, nothing else. She dropped it by spoonful, 3 at a time, waited for the edges to lace, flipped each round. Each cake came off the size of a saucer, crisp brown skirt, soft yellow heart. The sorghum sat in a tin pitcher on the table, slow and dark as tar. A child got 2 and was full. A working man got 6 and was satisfied. Your grandmother made these the way her mother had during the Depression. A sack of cornmeal lasted you a family 2 weeks. The supper cost 8 cents in 1944. By 1965, the kerosene stove was gone. The hoe cake went with it. You won't find it on any menu now. Nobody talked about this one at the family reunion, but everyone knew. Vienna sausages, straight from the tin, were the dinner that happened when dinner didn't happen. When the legs were tired, the stove felt too far, and the body just needed something before bed. The small can popped open with a pull tab, and the pale little sausages sat in their broth like something between a meal and an apology. Eaten cold with saltines and a squirt of yellow mustard, or picked up with fingers one at a time, this was a dinner measured in silence. It cost 35 cents in the 1970s. It required nothing, no cooking, no plates if you didn't want one, no effort beyond pulling the tab. For seniors living alone in small apartments after their families moved away, this was Tuesday night and Wednesday and sometimes Friday. Nobody judged it out loud because everyone had a can in the cabinet. The people who ate Vienna sausages for dinner weren't ashamed. They were tired, and tired is its own kind of hungry.
Dinner rolls made from scratch using leftover mashed potatoes became the soft, pillowy bread that absorbed gravy and made meals feel complete without buying expensive bakery items. Black mothers discovered that adding mashed potatoes to bread dough created rolls with incredible softness and moisture that stayed fresh for days, perfect for holiday meals where food needed to last. A single potato combined with flour, yeast, and minimal butter produced dozens of rolls that cost pennies compared to store-bought options. The dough was easy to work with, forgiving for inexperienced bakers, and could be shaped into various sizes depending on how many people needed feeding. Children loved pulling apart warm rolls to watch the steam escape, while adults appreciated how the potato rolls stayed soft even when served hours after baking. These rolls represented kitchen wisdom that turned leftovers and scraps into something families actively requested.
Number 20, stewed turnip greens with pot liquor bread. A galvanized washtub of greens on the kitchen floor in 1946 Atlanta. 2 pecks pulled that morning from the back lot. She stripped the leaves from the stems with her thumbs, tore them into ribbons, dropped them into a cast iron pot with a smoked ham hock and a quart of water. The greens cooked down for 3 hours, dark as wet leather. The pot liquor ran the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was the prize. She tore corn pone into a tin bowl, ladled the green broth over it, called the children for supper. Each portion cost 4 cents. The doctor in 1956 told her, The broth carried more iron than the steak he couldn't afford to recommend. Your grandmother already knew. She had been cooking it that way for decades. By 1989, the smoked ham hock was a specialty item, and the back lot where you grew the greens was a parking pad.
Soot biscuits were the kind of food you learned to trust when the fire was all you had. They were baked in soot-covered Dutch ovens, set right into the coals until the smell of toasted flour filled the air. The outsides came out black and charred, but inside they were soft, warm, and sweet from the faint taste of smoke. You brushed off the ash and split them open, steam rising like a small blessing. They were eaten with syrup, molasses, or even gravy if the morning allowed it. Families traveling, camping, or working the land knew this trick well. It was food that came straight from the earth and fire, raw and honest. Soot biscuits did not look like much, but they carried pride. They were proof that comfort could come from the simplest effort, that even ashes could feed the body and soothe the soul. The smell lingered on your hands and clothes, a reminder that good things sometimes came wrapped in smoke. Each bite tasted like work and gratitude, the flavor of survival baked in real flame. Cornbread and buttermilk supper bowls were the taste of simpler times, a meal born of necessity that never lost its charm. The cornbread, often left over from the night before, was crumbled into a bowl and soaked in cold buttermilk until it softened just right. The tang met the sweetness of corn in a perfect, quiet balance. For tired workers, it was supper and rest in one, cool and filling without fuss. Some added sugar, others salt, but every version told the same story. Of thrift, of satisfaction, of pride in making something from little. It was eaten on porches, in silence or soft conversation, the clinking of spoons the only sound. The simplicity made it sacred. It reminded people that food did not need luxury to bring joy. It only needed heart. Cornbread and buttermilk was a meal of gratitude, an act of stillness after long days of living and labor. Breaded veal patties were once a diner favorite that found steady homes in 1960s kitchens, served with gravy and mashed potatoes like something straight off a lunch counter menu. Families bought them because they were inexpensive, easy to cook, and tasted tender once fried and covered in gravy. The breading gave them a crisp exterior, while the inside stayed soft and mild, making them a hit with children who had not yet learned to love stronger flavors. The dish felt comforting, reliable, and just hearty enough to end a long day right. Even though they appear less often today, many people still crave that nostalgic taste because it reminds them of childhood dinners served hot on plates that clattered slightly when set on the table. There was something reassuring about the whole routine, from hearing the sizzle of the patties in the pan to watching the gravy bubble as it thickened. It was a kind of dinner that did not require fuss or stress, only a warm pan, a steady hand, and the quiet instinct of someone who cooked from memory instead of recipes. Those veal patties were proof that simple food could feel like a feast when shared at a table filled with familiar voices and everyday conversation.
Number 24, candied yams. In the Black Sunday dinner tradition, candied yams were not a side dish. They were a declaration. A woman in Birmingham, Alabama, peeled sweet potatoes with a paring knife so old the handle had been wrapped in electrical tape twice. She sliced them thick, layered them in a baking dish with butter, brown sugar, and a pour of vanilla she eyeballed from the bottle. No measuring spoons, no recipe, just decades of knowing how much sweet was enough. The yams went into the oven before church and came out when the sermon was over, bubbling in a syrup so thick you could hold a spoon upright in it. Some women added orange juice, others added nutmeg. The variations were as individual as the women who made them, and every version was correct because there was no written original to argue against. And by the early 2000s, most families had switched to canned yams from a grocery store. The slow-peeled, hand-sugared version faded out of your reach.
Shepherd's pie with leftover roast was the definition of reinvention, a masterpiece of thrift and comfort. Yesterday's scraps of meat were chopped fine, mixed with whatever vegetables had survived the week, and bound together with a splash of gravy. Sometimes a bit of leftover bread or oats thickened the filling, soaking up every ounce of flavor. On top went a layer of mashed potatoes, spread smooth with the back of a spoon, then dragged into peaks that browned beautifully in the oven. The smell was a blanket of warmth that wrapped the whole house. It was the kind of meal that could silence a room once served, everyone too busy savoring to speak. Families didn't need a lot to make it right, they just needed care and a cast-iron dish. It was food that turned hard times into shared joy, and scarcity into something that tasted abundant. Shepherd's pie was proof that love didn't show itself in grand gestures. It showed up in leftovers turned into miracles.
Number 11, roast leg of lamb. Black preachers drew a direct line from the Israelites, marking their doors with lamb's blood, to black families surviving slavery and Jim Crow. If you sat in that pew, you understood. Easter lamb was not just dinner. It was theology you could taste on your own plate. In rural southern communities through the mid-20th century, many black families kept small flocks of sheep. Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, a farming community founded by freed slaves after the Civil War, described spring sheep shearing as a community event. The lamb would be roasted whole or as a leg for Easter Sunday. A whole leg of lamb averaged $4.50 per pound in 2000. It now runs $9 to $12, putting a 7-pound leg at $63 to $84. United States lamb production has declined roughly 85% since the 1940s, from over 56 million sheep to under 5 million. As black families urbanized and moved north, access to fresh lamb declined. Ham took over as the default Easter meat. The lamb and its sermon disappeared together.
Baked macaroni and tomato casserole was a dish of invention, born in kitchens that never wasted a thing. Leftover noodles met tomato sauce, cheese, and a little milk to stretch it just enough to feed everyone. The casserole baked until bubbling, the top crisp and browned. It was the comfort of macaroni mixed with the tang of tomatoes, a meal that felt like home even when times were lean. Each bite balanced warmth and nostalgia, reminding families that flavor could come from the simplest pantry. Children loved the gooey center. Parents loved how far it went. It was thrift turned into tenderness, a little miracle baked in Pyrex. Baked macaroni and tomato casserole carried quiet triumph, the kind only those who made much from little could truly understand. The cheese pulled soft and golden as spoons dipped in, serving both hunger and history. It was living proof that love, not luxury, made the best meals. Every forkful carried the sound of laughter from crowded tables, the hum of radio music, and the strength of hands that kept families fed through every season.
Sunday dinner was never about the food alone. It was the table, the people around it, and the woman at the stove who turned almost nothing into something worth remembering every single week without writing a word of it down. Pick one from this list and make it this weekend. Fry a pork chop, simmer a pot of greens, or bake a cobbler the way she did. Drop the dish your grandmother made that did not make this list. The kitchen is still open.